Chapter 1277. What, she didn't check in? It was a satellite video communication. On the screen, Peter Chan was sweating profusely and didn't dare to look straight at her. He was in his 30s, so he naturally wouldn't be afraid of a girl in her early 20s. However, the person in front of him was a witch who dared to directly fire the president of a branch company in Fog City. He really couldn't help but be careful. Missing, to be exact, the lady you mentioned didn't go to the room we arranged, but stayed in Master Chio's suite. What? You let her go to the hotel? Didn't I say there was a traffic jam first? Peter Chan wiped his sweat with a handkerchief. Miss, that lady got in the car with Master Chio. We couldn't block it. Incompetent. I'm sorry. Peter Chan was even more panicked. He was afraid that his position as the manager of the operation department would come to an end. Unexpectedly, Missing on the other side of the earth sighed and waved her hand. Forget it, you've worked hard today. Take half a day off next week as compensation for today. Peter Chan was dumbfounded. He didn't expect to have half a day off after messing up. He was overjoyed on the spot. Thank you, Missing. Humph, I was going to give you a week's paid leave if this matter could be done well. Now it's gone, and you won't have this opportunity in the future. Thank you, Missing. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Of course, his expression was more bitter. As soon as the video communication ended, Miss Ing on the other side of the earth suddenly leaned back. The chair was pressed so hard that it seemed to be about to break. She muttered, I didn't know, it's really the Song family's genes. Whether it was her uncle Song Howren, who was like AB*TCH, or her grandfather whom she respected and loved, they had never been afraid of women's charms. She grew up in a family that relied entirely on illegal activities, so it was common for her to see such things. But except for her grandmother who had passed away, her grandfather had never intended to make the women around him his wife. As for Song Howren, he had no intention of getting married either. Why am I thinking about this? It was a rare Qingtian afternoon in Fog City. In front of an old 5-story building on the banks of the River Thames, a beetle with a high quality of life slowly stopped. After that, 2 elegant men in suits and leather shoes got out of the car. One of them was slightly older, about 35 years old, and was very capable. The other one was obviously much younger. He looked like a young man in his early 20s. He had blonde hair, looked young and energetic, and held a long object wrapped in brown cloth in his hand. At the top of the stairs, there was already a black man in a black windbreaker with an eye patch over his left eye waiting in front of the door of the small building. The older gentleman smiled and greeted the one-eyed black man. Nick, you should change the color of your eye mask. The one-eyed black man. Nick was obviously someone who did not like to smile. At this moment, his remaining eye was looking straight ahead as he said indifferently, Gareth, the master and mistress of this house are currently out. You have at most half an hour to exorcise the evil spirit from the woman of this house. Only half an hour? The energetic young man next to the middle-aged gentleman was stunned. The black man, Nick, said slowly, because I need at least 15 minutes to deal with the aftermath. In addition, I can't guarantee whether the master and mistress of this house will come back early. Okay. Gareth patted Nick's shoulder gently. Relax, friend. I'll finish before the time comes. Are you really not going to consider changing a new eye patch? I always feel that you're like the one in the movies. Nick directly opened the door behind him. Gareth shrugged and smiled as he walked into the house with the young man who followed him. Nick only closed the door after the two entered. The Knights of the Round Table was one of the oldest organizations in the land of Britain. Since its establishment, it had been guarding the peace of this land from the war of the past to the exorcism of the present. To this day, it had even faded from the sight of humans. Only a very small number of people knew that this mechanism still existed and was still operating. Gareth of the 12 Knights actually brought a newcomer out for a mission this time. It seems that it's time for the trial for the vacant seat again. Nick leaned against the door and thought to himself. Every 5 years, there would be a group of outstanding young people coming from all over the country to obtain the inheritance of one of the 12 knights, the name of Hector that had been left vacant until now. Klein, do you know the reason for the birth of evil spirits? On the wooden corridor, the man who had given up his original name and now inherited the name of Gareth suddenly turned around and asked. The young man named Klein quickly said, "All hatred, jealousy, and evil thoughts will remain in the form of evil thoughts if they can't find peace after the death of a person. They will grow by constantly devouring other evil thoughts and eventually become evil spirit. In addition, if evil spirits are left alone, they will continue to devour human lives and eventually become terrible evil spirit." Well said, you've memorized well. Gareth smiled slightly. But there are some things that aren't taught in the books. What are they? The young Klein quickly asked. Gareth looked at the end of the corridor and said casually, "If humans are willing to degrade themselves, they can also become evil spirits." I got it. Gareth stopped at the handrail at the end of the corridor and looked at the pillar of the handrail. "Did you bring the magic-revealing powder, Klein?" "Yes." Klein quickly took out a box the size of a mirror box and opened it very carefully. Then, he sprinkled some green powder on the pillar. A blood-red circle that looked as if it was still dripping with blood and was evil, with a pentagram as the foundation, slowly emerged. Klein was quite surprised. "Mr. Gareth, this is a magic circle?" "To be exact, it's a type of witchcraft ritual and a structure that is commonly used by a branch of the Sea of Love witches." Gareth spoke very carefully as if he was teaching. "This branch of witches is better at using drugs and mental witchcraft. In addition, it's also one of the few types of witches that doesn't prohibit contact with humans. Could it be that the woman of the master of this house is a branch of the Sea of Love witches?" Gareth said, "Not necessarily. It's also possible that she accidentally got a handwritten copy of their witchcraft that was left outside. Due to mistakes and improper learning, she embarked on the path of evil. The witchcraft of this branch of witches should basically be in the healing aspect, unlike this one, which is full of evil energy." "Mr. Gareth, you're really knowledgeable," Klein said respectfully. He was Gareth's knight servant. Even for such a position, he had to go through many tests before he could win it. Obviously, he cherished this opportunity very much and was fortunate enough to be recommended by Gareth to participate in the inheritance trial of Hector soon. Gareth shook his head and smiled. "I'm not knowledgeable. It's just that I've suffered enough in the past. About the Sea of Love witches, it was one of my seniors who told me. To be able to become Mr. Gareth Sr., he must be a righteous, kind, and powerful great knight." Klein was fascinated. "He's powerful, he's really powerful. Perhaps he's also kind, but he's not necessarily righteous." Gareth shook his head. "This senior has been stripped of his title as a knight 20 years ago. How could that be?" Klein was suddenly shocked, even more shocked than when he discovered the witchcraft on the pillar. To be stripped of his title as a knight by a mechanism, what kind of crime did he commit? "If you also have a daughter who's in love with a vampire." Gareth sighed slowly. He seemed to want to say something, but his eyes suddenly became sharp as an eagle's. Klein noticed Gareth's change in an instant, but he didn't have time to react. He only saw Gareth's arm waving at an incredible speed, a speed that exceeded the limits of the human body. Something had been cut apart by Gareth's swing and landed on the floor. It was something that resembled mud, something that resembled a viscous creature. After it had been cut apart and landed on the floor, it immediately lost its vitality and turned into a pile of black powder. "Klein." Gareth suddenly stepped aside and said coldly, "I'll leave this task to you. I haven't checked your progress in today's swordsmanship lesson." Klein knew that this was Mr. Gareth's test for him. After hesitating for a moment, he nodded resolutely. He untied the brown cloth on the long object in his hand. It was a one-handed cross longsword. Klein took a deep breath and walked along the corridor at the end of the corridor. He had actually experienced a few actual battles, but he was always assisting on the side. This was the first time he was dealing with it alone. Of course, such an actual battle would come sooner or later. He just didn't expect it to be so soon. I must not disappoint Mr. Gareth. Klein was firm in his belief. Klein, come on. Klein, you're great. Klein, come on. Behind him, the elegant knight Gareth suddenly put on a fake nose that he pulled out from somewhere. He put his hands on his hips and lifted his legs to dance. Mr. Gareth, you're one of the 12 knights of the Round Table, the great Gareth. Please stop your indecent behavior. You're disturbing me. Ah, it's rare for me to find a new type of fake nose. Gareth sighed in disappointment. Then, he said very softly, Klein, come on. Klein, come on. Klein sighed heavily. There was no doubt that he respected this knight from the bottom of his heart. If it wasn't for his true personality that would go off the rails from time to time, perhaps he would be even more perfect. Tidying up his mood, the young trainee knight once again approached the room at the end of the corridor. He only felt a cold chill that began to invade his body little by little. However, the strong physique that he had trained for many years was still able to resist this chill. Finally, the door of the room at the end of the corridor slammed open. An even colder airflow blew out from the room. It was actually a strong wind. At the same time, a burst of terrifying and sharp laughter sounded at this time. Klein moved against the wind. He infused the sword energy that he had trained through the ancient method into the steel sword in his hand. This slender cross sword suddenly emitted a weak green light and broke through the strong wind. Klein shouted loudly. He raised the cross sword in his hand and suddenly rushed into the room. Only the sound of smashing could be heard from the room. After a moment, a figure rolled out of the room. Klein's left eye had become red and swollen. He quickly stood up, raised the cross again, shouted and rushed in again. Roll out, stand up, raise the sword, rush in again. Roll out, stand up, raise the sword. Not knowing when it started, Gareth had an extra cup of coffee in his hand. Right, he also found an old-fashioned black record player in the corridor. Oh, the taste of the owner of this house is really good. I like it. He took out the black record and put it into the record player. Then, he moved the needle. It was a dance song, Blue Danube. Ha! Ha! Yeah! The diligent and unyielding battle cry and the notes of the dance song were wonderfully intertwined in the corridor. Gareth sat down and began to flip through today's newspaper. Oh, brave Klein, please be sure to persevere until I finish reading this article. I will work hard. Ha! Good boy. Een Tao? Miss Maid didn't eat the afternoon tea sent by the hotel. Instead, she prepared a light fruit plate for her master. Yes, this hotel is not bad. There is an indoor organic farm downstairs. I went to pick some and brought them back, Yi said softly. The stems of the cherries were all pulled out, like sparkling rubies. The suite on the upper floor of this hotel could be said to have everything. On the outside terrace, it was equipped with a large open-air swimming pool. Boss Luo was sitting on a beach chair on the terrace, reading an English book leisurely. He took a Een Tao from the plate and put it into his mouth to taste. Suddenly, he curiously said, Right, when I just came up, I didn't seem to see the 13th floor. Is it like this? In the West, the number 13 is a taboo. Miss Maid sat next to him and said softly, Many of the older buildings will remove the 13th floor, but it is very rare in modern times. Boss Luo looked at the River Thames outside and smiled. The missing 13th floor, I don't know if something interesting will happen. If the master wants it, it will naturally be there. Miss Maid told him the truth. Luocha was startled, then shook his head and smiled bitterly. I still want to be quiet for 2 more days. As he said, he picked up a Een Tao and sent it to the maid's mouth to feed her. Miss Maid lifted her hair, lowered her head and gently opened her lips, then slowly bit it. Is it delicious? Yes. Chapter 1278. Omega 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 Omega. Chicksum and he choked up and said, "A novel?" Nick took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. Then, he opened the door and walked up the stairs. When he walked up, Gareth was folding newspapers. He frowned and looked at the end of the corridor. Klein dragged his body and slowly walked out of the room. He was limping, and his arm that wasn't holding the sword was hanging down. His clothes were torn in many places, and his face was covered in dust. Of course, there was also blood mixed in. Reporting to Mr. Gareth, "The target has been successfully suppressed. You were right, she is indeed an illegal witch." "Witch?" Nick frowned and stared at Gareth. "Why is she a witch?" Gareth shrugged and said with a faint smile, "My friend, it is obvious that there is something wrong with your intelligence work this time." Nick did not argue about the intelligence issue. Instead, he said with slight anger, "Knight Gareth, since she is a witch, you should not let Klein act alone. Every apprentice knight is a valuable asset of the organization. As one of the 12 knights, you have an even greater obligation to protect the safety of these young knights." Gareth lowered his head, as if he was ashamed of Nick's reprimand and could not raise his head. Klein saw this, and although he was weak, he hurriedly said, "Mr. Nick, please do not blame Mr. Gareth. This is my request. It is my fault." Klein. Nick said indifferently, "Honesty should be the virtue that a knight should have." Okay, I apologize." Gareth raised his head abruptly. "I'm sorry." She didn't know when he had put on that weird fake nose again. "Gareth!" Nick's voice became much louder. Gareth plastered himself to the wall in fear. He did not have the slightest gentlemanly demeanor. He smiled apologetically and said, "Hey, buddy, relax. Haven't you heard the story of a lion pushing a cub off a cliff?" Plop! All of a sudden, Klein fell to the ground, face down, his body falling forward. He had already lost consciousness. When Klein woke up, he was already lying in the medical room of the round table mechanism. There was still a needle inserted into the back of his hand. Gareth, on the other hand, was sitting at the side, reading a small hardcover book, and wiping his tears from time to time. "Mr. Gareth, you're a man with a lot of feelings." Klein propped himself up forcefully. "You're awake." Gareth did not seem to care that his emotions were being seen. He simply closed the book. "How do you feel?" "It's as if my bones were disassembled and then pieced back together. The person who treated me must be an expert who likes to play with Legos." Klein smiled bitterly. Gareth said, "Child, I like your humor. How long have I been unconscious?" Klein raised his head and asked. 5 hours. Gareth said, 3 of your ribs are broken, your left arm is moderately fractured, and there is a lot of internal bleeding in your spleen. You also lost a decayed tooth. Congratulations, Klein. You have successfully survived a crusade against the evil witches and completed your mission very well. I don't think I've done well enough." Klein did not have the slightest bit of pride. Instead, he began to discuss with the experienced knight about the battle before he passed out. "I shouldn't have hesitated. That way, my arm might not have been fractured. Mr. Gareth? Oh, I'm sorry, where did you go?" Gareth yawned at this time. He was actually dozing off. This was probably the combination of a seemingly gentlemanly but lazy superior and a subordinate who was extremely serious in everything he did. "By the way, Mr. Gareth, what happened to the witch?" Gareth said, "Nick has already taken her into custody. She will be interrogated next. If she has a murder case, she will be punished." "Isn't she the daughter of that family? My previous deduction should be correct." Gareth said casually, "She accidentally obtained a handwritten copy of witchcraft. She didn't learn it properly and went astray. She should not have a direct relationship with the witches of the Sea of Love. As for the male and female owners of that house, someone will follow up and deal with them." Klein nodded, then looked around in confusion. The infirmary was very large. There were a total of 10 beds, but he was the only one using one at this time. Of course, the utilization rate here was generally not very high. After all, it was the capital of Britain. The power of the Knights of the Round Table was very strong here, so the chances of the knights being injured in missions were relatively small. It seems very quiet outside. Are they all on missions? Klein was thoughtful. His hearing was very good. It was a natural talent. Yes, I heard that a few orcs went missing. Gareth suddenly took out a pen from his chest, then took out a label and lowered his head to write something. Orcs? Klein opened his mouth in surprise. Gareth said, "A group of illegally captured orcs passed by the docks here by water. Our people received the news and went to rescue them. In the process of the mission, a few orcs went missing. Considering the emotions of these orcs at that time, they may cause a lot of damage, so our Mr. Hopkins ordered that all those who don't have a mission at hand should be dispatched to search for the orcs." Mr. Hopkins was not a knight, but he was the person in charge of the Knights of Fog. Illegally captured. Klein lowered his head and frowned slightly. "The orc trafficking has always existed," Gareth said calmly. Gareth said indifferently, "Especially some fanatical fellows in the Magician Association. They especially like to use orcs for their research. We can't let these lost orcs out there. It's too dangerous." Klein was about to get out of bed as he said this, but Gareth stuffed a note into Klein's hand. "Well, this is for you." "What is this?" "Of course, it's your permission slip." Gareth smiled and said, "Knight Klein, for the sake of the next knight inheritance, I ask you not to continue to work as a trainee knight until you recover from your injuries. Of course, you can still come to the organization. After all, the nurses here are so charming, right?" After that, ignoring Klein's refutation, Gareth patted him on the shoulder. "Have a good rest." The knight pulled open the curtain beside the bed and left in a carefree manner. Then, a nurse came in with medicine and pills in her hand. It was an old, dark-skinned auntie with red lips. "Mr. Gareth, you lied. Oh, young man, you are so pitiful. I will take good care of you. Come, let me take off your clothes and apply the medicine, sweetheart." I will do it myself. "Madam, please don't touch that place." It was still sunny in the morning, but in the afternoon it started to drizzle on the streets of Fog City. People were wearing windbreakers and holding all kinds of umbrellas as they shuttled through the street. A man with a black umbrella, a khaki windbreaker, and a hat stopped in front of a red building. He took a detour to the back alley and went down the side stairs. It was an underground bar. The door and the walls on both sides were painted with all kinds of graffiti. It was unknown if it was because the bar was not open yet, but other than the bartender who was wiping glasses, there were no other customers in the deserted bar. "Strongbow." The man sat down and looked at the bartender as he ordered a drink. The bartender was a little old. He had a white beard and looked to be around 50 years old, but his manners were very elegant. "Strongbow." The bartender slowly put down the drink requested by the customer, then turned around and continued his work. The customer sipped the wine for a while, and then suddenly said, "Do you know, compared to sunny weather, I prefer rainy weather." When the bartender heard this, he looked back and ignored him. He said to himself, "Wherever the sunlight reaches, the shadows will be expelled. They will be compressed little by little, just like homeless people. But real homeless people can still curl up in corners or subway stations, but the shadows will continue to be compressed. Only on a cloudy day, they will have the opportunity to be unscrupulous. The sunlight will cry because of your words." The bartender suddenly said. He said, "Then let the sunlight not appear." The bartender frowned and directly turned around, but the customer in front of him had disappeared. There was only a spinning coin on the table. At the same time, on the table next to the cup, there were wet words written with wine. "Serpent snake." The coin slowly stopped spinning. The girl looked very thin and weak, as if she had been malnourished for a long time. At the same time, she wore a very thin dress that had long been dirty. At the same time, there were many cracks in it. In the alley, the girl was hiding from the rain. The rain had just stopped. She was curled up under the eaves of someone's back door. She was holding a box of Chinese fried noodles that had obviously been eaten, but hadn't been thrown away because it had been eaten. Although it was called Chinese fried noodles, most entrepreneurs had already improved the recipe to cater to the local taste. Maybe the real Chinese were not used to it. However, the girl at this time seemed to be really hungry from the way she was wolfing down the food. She seemed to be afraid of something, and looked around nervously from time to time. Her helplessness was not hidden at all, and the cold brought by the rain and the cloudy day. "Hey, look what I found!" 3 young men dressed as punks surrounded the girl in front of the back door. What a poor little wildcat! Their faces had a look that could make the girl panic. One of them directly took out a few bills and was about to speak. In the end, Klein still took out the Round Table Mechanisms medical room and rode on his beloved car, Harley Davidson. In the case of a moderate fracture of his left arm, he could only put a plaster on his hand and wrapped it around his neck with a bandage. He slowly drove on the road with the injury. He didn't live in the dormitory of the Round Table Mechanism, but rented a small house by the river. The apprentice knight's job was very dangerous but relatively low. The apprentice knight's salary and treatment were also very good. The motorcycle abruptly came to a stop. The scene of the girl being bullied by several hooligans entered Klein's peripheral vision in an instant. Without any consideration, he steered the motorcycle, swerved, and barged into the alley. The strong headlights directly pierced the eyes of these young men dressed as punks, making their eyes hurt. One of the young men's hand was still holding the ragged girl's arm at this time, as if he was pulling it. "Hey, friend, bullying a lady is not a gentleman's behavior." Klein lifted the blindfold on the windshield, and at the same time, pulled out the key on the motorcycle and walked down. The young man who was pulling the girl's arm frowned, but still let go of the girl's arm. But the other young man at the side at this time suddenly sneered at this time, "Like you, suddenly disturbing others, it doesn't seem to be a gentleman's behavior, right? You'd better take care of yourself first. Just came out of the hospital?" Klein frowned and then said indifferently, "Please don't trouble this lady again, okay? We didn't trouble her." The leading young man shook his head. "Believe me, this is not a hero saving a damsel in distress. We just feel that she is pitiful and want to help her." But Klein seemed to have made up his mind. He took off his helmet and hung it on the handle of the motorcycle, saying indifferently, "The 6th rule of the Knight's Regulations, never force a lady. The 5th rule of the Knight's Regulations, always give aid to a lady. Get out." The 3 young men frowned and looked at each other, then the leading young man said directly, "And then hand her over to you? Sorry, you are not an unknown person. Gentlemen, I don't want you to regret, really." Klein sighed and slowly walked forward. Although he was injured, it was more than enough to deal with these young men. He was thinking about how to deal with this matter properly. Maybe it was a good choice to scare them away. After all, they didn't do any substantial harm to this lady, and the police couldn't convict them. He even hoped that this matter could be solved with violence. But at this time, the leading young man reached into his pocket, as if he was going to take out something. Klein was startled, thinking that the other party was going to take out some kind of weapon, so he planned to take the initiative. He rushed forward, but just when he rushed to the front of the young man, he was stunned and abruptly stopped. Social worker's certificate?" The young man sighed and said, "Yes, this is my work certificate. I just saw that this lady was in trouble, so I planned to take her back to the social workers' center first." "Did you misunderstand something? If you still don't believe me, you can call and ask. In addition, this is my ID card." But you." Klein looked at the 3 of them strangely. Earrings, punk, dyed hair and black lips. Damn, are they social workers of the social workers center? Is it strange? We just have this hobby, and we just came back from performing. The young man shrugged his shoulders. "This is awkward. Very sorry." Baidu search Baidu Chinese network. No advertising message. Chapter 1279. Making mistakes is not terrible. What is terrible is finding excuses for yourself to escape after making a mistake. Klein's Knight's Code. Klein followed the three young men back to the social work center. Because he was still a little worried, Klein followed the three young men all the way to the social work center. Only then did he dispel the last doubts in his heart. After confirming the identities of the three people, Klein suddenly remembered that there was a saying in the distant East. I smoke, get tattoos, drink, fight, and have abortions, but I am a good woman. When the three of them took off their makeup and put on their normal clothes, they indeed looked like two different people. Will, who was wearing glasses, even had a scholarly air to him. This made Klein apologize for a long time. Ha ha ha, actually, we were also shocked at that time. You suddenly rushed in with injuries all over your body. We were really afraid that there would be a conflict and you would be injured again. The young man was called Will. He had been working in the social work center for 3 years. He was also a rock and roll enthusiast. He formed a band with 2 friends and often participated in some charity activities. You didn't expect it, right? If Mr. Gareth was here, he would definitely use a teasing tone to talk to me, right? Klein knew that he was in the wrong from the beginning, so his attitude became more and more proper. What happened next was not his business. Although the girl did not speak along the way and showed fear and other emotions, she was after all brought to the social work center. She would receive good help here, so Klein did not need to worry about anything. He intended to say goodbye to Will and the others. Just as they were about to leave, a female social worker from the social worker center suddenly walked back with quick steps. There was a look of dissatisfaction on her face. This female social worker was the one who had been ordered by Will to wash and change the girl's clothes. After all, they were all men. Will, I doubt your judgment ability. The ordinary-looking female social worker said expressionlessly, This child is obviously a boy. You actually asked me to wash him? Oh, a boy. What, a boy? Inside the room, the boy had already changed into a set of clothes. The clothes were donated by someone else. His long brown hair was simply tied up with a rubber band. Soft facial lines, emerald eyes, slender figure, already white skin, and that inconspicuous but definitely present Adam's apple. Of course, other sexual characteristics had also been vaguely confirmed. This delicate guy who exuded a delicate beauty from inside out was indeed a man. Will and Klein were amazed, but the other 2 members of the band with Will covered their eyes in heartache. What are you going to do with him? Klein calmed himself down and changed the word, she to he. He hasn't said anything. Will calmed himself down and said, Just now I also mentioned that there are quite a number of bruises on his body, especially on his back. We suspect that he may have been severely abused. Due to the shock, he may have been traumatized. At the same time, we did not find anything like identification on him. I think they'll contact the police and figure out his identity first. Don't worry, he will be well taken care of here. We have a good psychological counselor, but he is on leave today. He could see that Klein was also a warm-hearted person, although riding a Harley on the street with bandages all over his body was indeed easy to be misunderstood. Sorry to trouble you. Klein nodded and took out a business card. This is my contact information. If there's anything I can help you with, please don't hesitate. If the police need to take a statement, you can contact me directly. Shoe store? Klein glanced at the name printed on the business card. Klein smiled and said, It's just an ancestral craft. He soon officially said goodbye to Will and the other 2, then rode his motorcycle and left the community center. He went back to his own place, which was also where his shoe store was located. Before becoming a trainee knight, Klein was a qualified shoemaker. His father was also a shoemaker. At the same time, his father was also a knight, but until he passed away, he did not get the title of the 12 Knight. He only became a grand knight in the round table mechanism. When going out, Luochu declined the car arranged by Peter Chan and chose a double-decker bus. Sightseeing, taking photos, eating delicious food, young people performing on the street, and artists. Just like the most ordinary travelers. During dinner, Luochu did not go to find a restaurant. Instead, he planned to take advantage of this time to see the famous scenic spots. After all, it was rare to come here, even if he was just passing by. Basically, after 5:30 p.m., the major scenic spots in Fog City were closed to the public, and because of the sudden rain, these scenic spots were particularly deserted. Desertion had its advantages. At least, it felt like the whole place was booked. Of course, there were still some places that were open at night. Let's go to that? Across the river bank, Luochu pointed to the huge rotating, across the river bank. The huge Ferris wheel called the Eye of Fog City. Miss Maid of course agreed, but she didn't know if she could get a seat with only her master. If there was another pair of couples next to them, it would spoil the atmosphere. On the street, a man in a yellow windbreaker was strolling. The collar had been raised, covering a small part of his face, and the lowered brim of his hat also blocked his eyes. He walked alone. Men and women of all shapes and sizes walked past him on the street. Suddenly, he stopped in front of a dresser and looked at himself in the glass. He began to tidy up his appearance. Suddenly, in the moment when the passers-by didn't pay attention to him, the man in the yellow windbreaker suddenly took a step. This step went directly into the glass of the window. In other words, he seemed to directly go through the window and disappeared in an instant. Almost at the same time, at the place where the man in the yellow windbreaker disappeared, 3 men suddenly walked quickly from different places on the street. They finally met at the place where the man in the windbreaker disappeared. One of them was flustered and exasperated. "It's time travel, we've been discovered." Another man quickly took out his communicator. "This is the Raptor Group, we've lost the target." In another alley across the street from the dresser shop, a whirlpool suddenly appeared, and then a figure emerged from the whirlpool. The man in the yellow windbreaker reached out to hold the hat he was wearing, with a smile at the corner of his mouth, and then continued to walk forward. However, in front of him, there was a bouncing red ball that blocked the windbreaker-wearing man's path. The fist-sized red ball was currently bouncing up and down. Suddenly, the red ball jumped up even higher than before. It jumped all the way to the railing of a back staircase at a height of 3 meters, and jumped into the hands of a clown. He was called a clown only because his makeup was like a clown, not because of his clothes. In fact, the clown was wearing a black suit. The makeup on the clown's left eye melted, like a drop of tear, hanging on his pink and white face. And the wide red lips obviously didn't have a smile. The man in the yellow windbreaker looked up, then took off his hat and smiled politely. "It's my honor to have Your Excellency Dagonet block my way." The clown in the corridor. The knight with the name Dagonet gently jumped down. The raised lip makeup was not only crying but also smiling. He slowly said in a very pleasant voice, as a senior cadre of Doomsday Myth, "It's my honor to be able to arrest you personally. Mr. Reed, I wonder if you're interested in going back with me?" The man in the yellow windbreaker. Reed sneered, "I'm just a tourist. It's not kind of you Knights of the Round Table to treat a tourist like this. I heard that a few orcs went missing today. That's not a good thing. What if these orcs suddenly go crazy in the busy city?" The clown sneered, "You're the one who gave us the information that a group of illegally arrested orcs will pass by the Fog City dock. I'm curious, why did you give me such information? Now, most of my colleagues are busy looking for these orcs on the streets, but you, Mr. Reed, are wandering around the streets of Fog City. I'm really interested in your intentions. I don't think I have the right to say no?" It was a question like a test, but this Mr. Reed didn't seem to be afraid. Mr. Clown played with the red ball in his hand and gently threw it to the ground. The red ball bounced on the ground and then returned to his hand. This seemed to be a signal to attack. The moment the red ball was in his hand, it directly shot out from the clown's palm. The target was naturally Mr. Reed. But he was already prepared. The moment the red ball was shot, the hat in his hand suddenly turned. The red ball was shot directly into the hat. The hat continued to turn. When it turned back again, the red ball was shot out again, this time towards the clown, like a magician's prop. It was a simple fight, but both sides didn't gain any advantage. "Mr. Knight, I don't think you want to have a fight with me on the streets of Fog City, right?" The senior officer of Doomsday Myth said calmly. "After all, you're not a criminal like me. We don't have so many scruples." "Just right." Mr. Clown shrugged and said, "I'm also planning to accept punishment and get a good suspension leave. I've been working too much recently." Reed narrowed his eyes. He didn't know if it was because of his good luck that he met this clown. Obviously, the clown, Dagonet, was not the strongest knight of the Round Table, but he must be the most unruly guy. To some extent, he could even be described as a lunatic. He had more important things to do today, so he didn't intend to delay time with this lunatic here. "Okay." Reed suddenly raised his hands. "I'll go back with you." Hearing this, Mr. Clown didn't seem to let down his guard. In the next moment, Reed's figure disappeared from the spot, just like how he disappeared in front of the window of the clothing store. Mr. Clown was not surprised. The moment Rant escaped, he bent his legs slightly and rushed forward. Yes, that powerful jumping force made his body look like an arrow that was shot out toward a certain direction. Somewhere on the roof of a building on the street, after a series of distortions, Reed slowly landed, but at this moment, Mr. Clown arrived almost at the same time. Reed's expression slightly changed. His teleportation skill was limited, so he couldn't teleport long distances. What a terrifying physique! What a pleasant game of cat and mouse! Reed used his teleportation skill again. His body disappeared and reappeared in the night sky again and again, constantly moving over the streets of Fog City, as if he had obtained the ability to fly. But Mr. Clown behind him was always able to catch up with him again and again with his terrifying perception and strong physique. Just like what Mr. Clown said, this was really just a game of cat and mouse. Finally, after another round of catching, Reed suddenly stopped, and this time he didn't use his teleportation skill. "Are you tired of this game?" Mr. Clown stopped as well. The two of them confronted each other on top of a huge support frame. The colorful lights in the surroundings shone on them at this moment. "Mr. Clown, is the scenery here good?" Reed smiled and looked down. Below them, there were many men and women, and all kinds of people were waiting. The place where Reed and Clown were confronting each other was on the support frame of the world-famous supergiant Ferris wheel, the Eye of Fog City. Mr. Clown also glanced at it. Unexpectedly, Reed pressed his hands on the support frame of the Ferris wheel with a touch of madness. The shadow snake is about to reappear, and this is the beginning, starting from death. At this moment, a powerful magical power was channeled into the support frame of the Ferris wheel. The axis of the Ferris wheel was deformed because it couldn't bear the pressure of the magical power. The Eye of Fog City that was slowly rotating might fall off the support frame in the next second, and then crash down on the numerous tourists. At this moment, Mr. Clown didn't have any hesitation. He, who was always eccentric, obviously didn't want to see so many people die under the collapse of the Eye of Fog City. He had to give up the good opportunity to attack Reed, and jump to the axis of the support frame, intending to use his physical strength to pull the Eye of Fog City and the support frame off. But the sudden break of the support frame had already caused the Eye of Fog City to shake. Those tourists who had already sat in the seats and were enjoying the night view of Fog City became frightened because of this. "Can't I catch up?" Mr. Clown's face became extremely solemn. "You can't catch up." Reed's voice came from above. It was so crazy. "The shadow snake is about to reappear. And this is the beginning, starting from death." He once again said those words like a declaration. Mr. Clown, one of the 12 knights, was full after all. Just 1 point, and the Eye of Fog City completely fell off from the axis of the support frame. A sickly smile appeared on Reed's face. Below the Eye of the Fog City, the music that was played for the tourists was now so beautiful, as if it was the concerto of death. What a beautiful sound! As if he had already seen a lot of deaths, and the annoyed and angry expression on Mr. Clown's face. He opened his hands, closed his eyes, and wanted to embrace this beautiful moment. Music! The music was still pleasant to listen to, and there was also a pleasant atmosphere. The colorful lights of the Eye of Fog City once again swept over Mr. Reed's body. After a few seconds, Mr. Reed opened his eyes in astonishment. The expected collapse of the Eye of Fog City didn't happen. The cold wind blew, and Mr. Reed stared at the Eye of Fog City that continued to rotate slowly, with his mouth wide open. Not only him, Mr. Clown, who was standing on the bearing, was also the same at this moment. Because of the close distance, he clearly saw what happened just now. The bearing that had fallen off magically returned to its original position in front of his eyes. Not only that, the steel nails and screws that were broken by the magic power even flew back from all directions and fixed the bearing again. The Ferris wheel slowly rotated. A bloody crisis disappeared just like that. At this moment, a black flame abruptly rose from the bottom of the bearing with a speed as fast as lightning. The black flame traveled along the core of the bearing and instantly reached Mr. Reed's body. Bang! Mr. Reed didn't have time to scream as his whole body was wrapped by the black flame, and then he fell from above. Mr. Clown was once again surprised by this unexpected turn of events. He even took a picture of Mr. Reed's face as he fell. In one of the seats of the Eye of Fog City, a boss looked out with a strange expression. He really intended to come here for sightseeing, and it was already the last stop of today's sightseeing. Obviously, the transaction had been closed, but he was still a troublemaker. The atmosphere is obviously very good. The black flame flickered on Miss Maid's fingertips. Miss Maid, who gradually began to lose her indifference, seemed to be angry at this moment. Yen 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 PS1. The icing on the cake is the book, I'm Really Immortal, the author, Summer Flower. I don't need to say more. PS2. The additional chapter will be delayed. Chapter 1280. The black flames burning on Ren's body dissipated with the wind before he was about to fall to the ground. Mr. Clown suddenly jumped down before Ren's body completely fell and was crushed into a meat patty. With a few leaps, he landed outside the crowd in a corner of the square where the Eye of Fog City was located, avoiding the crowd. The Ferris wheel was still rotating slowly, but Mr. Clown stared at the many cabins and frowned. At the same time, he also checked Ren's situation. At this time, Ren could be described as terrible. He had completely lost consciousness, his clothes were completely burned, and his skin was mostly charred black. His eyes were even white. Mr. Dagonite. At this time, 3 Grand Knights of the Round Table mechanism squeezed out of the crowd, found Mr. Clown's position, and rushed over immediately. What happened? Just now, we seemed to see the Eye of Fog City falling. This is? They looked at the guy who was carried on Mr. Clown's shoulder and burned into charcoal. He's Rent. Dagonite casually threw him on the ground. He's still breathing. Take him back, he should be able to be saved. As expected of Mr. Dagonite. The 3 Grand Knights were full of admiration. Congratulations, you defeated a senior officer of Doomsday Myth. It's not me. You go back first, I still have something to do. Mr. Clown shook his head, and then under the astonished gazes of the 3 Grand Knights, he walked back to the crowd to the Eye of Fog City. They didn't know what had just happened in the Eye of the Fog City, nor did they know about the terrifying black flame that had suddenly appeared. But the clown Dagonet had seen everything clearly, as well as the scene of the Ferris wheel's bearing being restored. Dagonite walked in the crowd. The crowd was discussing what had just happened. Obviously, many people saw the Eye of Fog City move. But in fact, the Eye of Fog City continued to rotate, and nothing happened, which made the crowd feel strange. It seems like the repair spell, but this level of repair spell, who else can use it except for the few people in the Magician Association? His gaze began to search through the crowd. He didn't even let go of those lovers who were walking out of their seats, trying to find some clues. But even after the tourists on the Ferris wheel had left and the staff had chosen to temporarily close the Eye of Fog City due to the unusual movement, Dagonet still didn't find anything of value. However, his clown suit attracted the attention of many tourists. In the end, Dagonet could only leave this place with doubts in his heart and return to the round table mechanism to report on his mission. Mr. Hopkins, the person in charge of the agency, had given him an order that could not be disobeyed. He was required to rush back immediately to explain the matter of Reed. Later, after repeated inspections by the staff, they found that the Eye of Fog City did not have any fault. Then, under the strong request of the tourists, it was reopened. A new batch of tourists was waiting in line to enter the cockpit. Boss Luo bought 2 sticks of ice cream from the ice cream cart nearby, and came to Miss Maid's side. He chuckled and said, "Sit again. Don't be angry this time. There shouldn't be anything strange happening." "I'm not angry." Miss Maid smiled slightly. Boss Luo just smiled and didn't say anything. He had burned people to such an extent. After that, nothing happened. Sir Hopkins was 60 years old this year. His gray hair was very neatly combed. As the person in charge of the round table mechanism in Fog City, he had served for more than 30 years and witnessed the birth of 2 generations of the 12 Knights of the Round Table. But he was just an ordinary person. He didn't have the strength and strong physique of the knights. But he had another identity, that was, a member of the royal family of the ancient British Empire. That's about it. In front of this Sir Hopkins, Mr. Clown stood very properly. I suspect that there is a very powerful magician in the Fog City. Not only can he use the superstandard restoration spell, but he also has the terrifying black flame. According to our information about the Magicians Association, there is no one who fits your description, Knight Dagonet. Sir Hopkins said slowly, "Of course, I believe that as a noble knight, you didn't deceive me. So, I will send someone to investigate as soon as possible. Now we should discuss the matter of Rend." Dagonet said in surprise, "Sir, hasn't Rend been caught?" Sir Hopkins made a gesture to wait, and at this moment, the door of the room was pushed open. Gareth, also one of the 12 Knights, walked in directly. As the center of the country, the Fog City had a total of 3 12 Knights of the Round Table. One of them was Her Majesty the Queen, who was responsible for guarding the country. The other 2 were Gareth and Dagonet. They were mainly responsible for the security of non-human creatures in the Fog City area. Of course, more ordinary knights and grand knights in the mechanism were dispatched. Gareth would occasionally participate in ordinary operations, mainly because he was idle. As for Dagonet, it depended on his mood, and he would only act on things that interested him. "Gareth is here. We can start now." Sir Hopkins knocked on the table and said. Gareth suddenly said, "Sir, don't we need to wait for Lancelot?" Sir Hopkins said, "Lancelot is with Her Majesty the Queen and can't leave for the time being. I'll send the content of this meeting over later." "What the hell happened?" Gareth asked sternly. Hopkins rarely asked him and Dagonet to discuss issues at the same time. The last time they met was to deal with the Holy Blood ceremony that the 13 clans were about to hold this year more than a month ago. It's about the organization Doomsday Myth. Sir Hopkins turned off the lights in the room and turned on the side projector at the same time. On the wall, the projected information began to become conspicuous. Pictures flashed in front of Gareth and Dagonet's eyes, and their faces gradually became dignified. The National Museum of Scotland, Blenheim Palace, Sheffield Cathedral, and Old Trafford Stadium. And there's even a league match being held in the stadium, with tens of thousands of fans watching from the seat. Sir Hopkins said with a heavy expression, Just tonight, more than an hour ago, these places were attacked at the same time. If you count the Eye of Fog City, there are a total of 5 places. Who did it? Gareth frowned. This was the most serious provocation to the British Empire. The shadow snake is about to reappear, and this is the beginning, starting from death. Sir Hopkins said seriously, Doomsday Myth. And, without exception, these words written in blood were all left in these places that were attacked. Are these thugs planning to declare war on us? Dagonet narrowed his eyes. I'm not sure if they've declared war or not, Sir Hopkins said in a deep voice. But it's clear that Her Majesty was furious after learning about these things. The myth of Doomsday is so crazy that they dared to attack so many places in broad daylight. Then, in the next second, they might directly break into the royal palace. Her Majesty isn't willing to let Lancelot leave at all. It's reasonable to say that Doomsday Myth is just a new organization, Gareth said in a low voice. Most of the people they recruit are on the Magician Association's wanted list, and there are also some Inhumans who have a very bad reputation. But overall, they're just a plate of loose sand, and haven't done anything too outrageous in the past year. This time, why are they making such a big fuss? We have to find out something from the captured Reed, otherwise we'll always be in a passive position, Sir Hopkins said solemnly. Knight Gareth, Knight Dargoni, I'm now officially ordering you two to find out all the people related to the Doomsday Myth hidden in the Fog City. We can't let these lunatics move again under our noses. Sir, what about the orcs who went missing? Gareth asked. Let Grand Knight Simpton do a complicated search. The most important thing now is to organize the next activities of Doomsday Myth, especially similar attacks. They can't happen again. Yes, sir. The two stood at attention, clenched their fists, and put them on their chests. On the street, the pedestrians who were returning at night stood in front of the window in front of the TV shop, watching the temporary news that was being reported on the TV. They all covered their mouths with their hands, because the news report was too scary. It seemed to be a terrorist attack. At the same time, in different places, the number of casualties was still being calculated, but no organization had admitted it yet. Miss Maid was in a good mood. After coming down from the Eye of Fog City for the second time, she had been in a good mood. Even if she saw the news at this time, she didn't have any influence. Instead, she was very obedient and accompanied her master to watch the news live on TV. It should be the same group of people as the one in the Eye of Fog City just now, Luaccio said thoughtfully. Although Miss Maid did throw out a ball of black flame, unless the customer asked, the club basically wouldn't kill any creatures. After all, according to the previous business model, every one of them could be a potential customer. But of course, it wasn't a small punishment after all. It could be said that it directly burned half of their lives. It seems that it's necessary to clean up this dangerous source that can lead to the death of a large number of potential customers. Miss Maid smiled softly. We're actually not the messengers of justice. Luaccio smiled and was quite happy with Miss Maid's expression of emotions. In fact, this reason seemed to be reasonable. After all, compared to the previous president, his degree of freedom was actually higher. There seems to be an organization similar to the authority here. Luaccio thought for a while and said, they should be able to deal with it. Well, do you know the Knights of the Round Table? Miss Maid said telepathically, Master, are you thinking about the incident that you met Mr. Amonst in Tushini's manor that day? Luaccio nodded, opened his palm, and a necklace appeared. This was what Amonst handed over before his death, an opportunity to participate in the trial of the 12 Knights' inheritance. Such an opportunity was probably very precious, for people who wanted to become knights. But naturally, it didn't have much effect on Boss Luo. This was not a trade item, but something given by Amonst before his death. Luaccio wanted to give such an opportunity to the right person. Master, how much do you know about the Knights of the Round Table? Miss Maid asked softly. Luocio said honestly. Not much, probably familiar stories like King Arthur, The Sword in the Lake, and The Fairy. Well, I think the content of the cartoons I watched when I was young doesn't count. Is there really a fairy in the lake? Miss Maid thought for a while and said, generally speaking, the sword in the lake in the popular knowledge of King Arthur came from the legend of the Celtic gods, the magic sword Caladbolg that was held by the hero Fergus MacRoy in the Celtic gods. As for the fairy in the lake, it also belongs to the Celtic gods. The queen of the Shadow Country that Master met in South America, who was summoned by Prince Lucifer, also came from this god system. Celtic gods. Luocio nodded and remembered this god system. Miss Maid suddenly said, however, the Celtic gods have perished, and the entire Holy Kingdom has been broken. Finally, it was swallowed up by the dimensional gap. In the end, many gods in the god system could only live among the heroic spirits and become servants by obeying their contractors. Only then could they survive as heroic spirit. In fact, after King Arthur returned to the Utopia after his death, he also became a summoned heroic spirit when the Holy Kingdom perished. As for the first generation of the 12 knights, they also entered the heroic spirits one by one soon after. But before the 12 knights died, they left a part of their power to guard the country. She twirled her fingers around the ends of her hair gently. The Knights of the Round Table is actually an organization that preserved part of the power of the 12 first-generation knights. It was established after the death of the 12 knights. Over the years, it has been training qualified knights to inherit the power. In the beginning, the Knights of the Round Table was more like a civilian organization. It did not participate in the later division and war of the British Kingdom. It just stopped the local evil. But in modern times, it has the shadow of an official. The most important reason is that in modern times, there was a secret marriage between the modern royal family and the descendants of King Arthur. This successfully prompted the modern royal family of the British Kingdom to successfully intervene in the Knights of the Round Table. I see. Luocio nodded, then smiled and said, go back and tell me in detail. There is no reason to let the lady stand on the street all the time. Miss Chambermaid had long since ceased to breathe. Yin P.S. 4/27. Chapter 1281. Peter Chan had been standing in front of the Song Dynasty Hotel, worried. Originally, there should have been someone with a higher position to replace him. In other words, even the president of the Song Dynasty branch in Fog City would have been happy to do this bellboy job. However, Peter Chan was lucky enough to be the first one to receive a guest at the airport. But at this time, Peter Chan definitely did not think that this job was a beautiful job. More than an hour ago, several terrorist attacks had occurred in several places in the British Isles at the same time, especially the scene at the football stadium. The injuries reported on the television could be said to be shocking. Although Fog City was still safe at the moment, Peter Chan really didn't know how angry Miss Ng, who could fire the president of the branch, would be if something happened. Her attitude should be tougher. Even if she didn't prepare a car, she should at least send 2 people to follow her. Peter Chan muttered outside the hotel, burning with anxiety. Fortunately, in such a torturous wait, Luocio and the servant girl slowly walked in from outside. Looking at the relaxed expressions on their faces, Peter Chan secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Oh, Master Chiu, I want to swear to the great Shiva that next time, I won't let you go out alone. Peter Chan walked up quickly. He was still wearing the clothes he wore when he picked Luocio up at the airport. In fact, during the 2 days when Luocio stayed here, Peter Chan didn't intend to let himself get off work. Anyway, there were many rooms in the hotel, so it was not a problem to wash up, eat, and sleep here. Mr. Chen, are you worried about the attack? Luocio smiled. Don't worry, we're fine. It's quite safe here. That's right. But Peter Chen said, but those attackers are not humane. Today is Edinburgh. Who knows, they might suddenly appear in Fog City later in the night. Master Chiu, it's safer for you and your partner to stay in the hotel. If you feel bored, we have a lot of entertainment facilities here. I'm sure you won't feel bored. Anyway, he had more than half a day, so there was a lot of time for him to walk around. Luocio also wanted to see if something would happen while he was hiding in this hotel. He planned to stay for another day, and then leave for the university the day after tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Chin, Luocio replied casually. I'll accompany you two back to your room. Peter Chan seemed to be worried. Perhaps he would only relax when he saw the two of them return to their room. Suddenly, a loud noise came from the lobby of the hotel. A group of security personnel rushed out in a hurry. They were chasing a guy in a black coat. The guy in the black coat was extremely agile. He jumped up and down in the lobby, making the security personnel chasing after him look like they were in a sorry state. Even many customers who were checking in were caught in the crossfire. What happened? What happened? Chen Bide angrily grabbed a security guard and questioned him. The security in the Song dynasty had always been very good. Such a thing would not happen even once in a few years. If the VIP was harassed, and the VIP casually told Miss Ng that the security here was not good, the shop in Fog City would probably be shaken up. The security guard obviously recognized Chen Bide and quickly said, Mr. Chen, a guy ran into the kitchen from somewhere and is stealing food. He's not our guest. We wanted to drive him away, but this guy is too agile. You saw it. Bastard. There are so many people, and you can't even catch one person? Peter Chan was furious. But it was useless to be angry. After all, it had happened. After the guy in the black coat caused a huge commotion in the hall, he immediately rushed out. Really? I'm sorry to make you laugh. Peter Chan awkwardly came in front of Luocio. Just a moment ago, he said that the security here was actually very good. Luocio casually glanced at the direction where the guy rushed out and said with a smile, Mr. Chin, if you catch him, don't be too strict. But this person is a thief? Peter Chan was startled. If a thief was caught, even if he was not taken to the police station, he would at least be beaten. It was a basic practice. Luocio shook his head slightly. If he wasn't hungry or had no choice, he wouldn't steal food. Besides, although it was a bit messy, the other party didn't really hurt anyone, right? Then okay. Chen Bide nodded. Although he promised, after he really caught the culprit, he would say it then. He smiled apologetically and said, Young Master Chiu, you're really a kind person. I'll send the two of you back to your room. After saying that, Peter Chan turned to look at the security guard who was caught for questioning and said in a deep voice, You heard that, right? After catching him, don't be too strict. If he is hungry, give him something to eat and drive him away. The security guard quickly nodded and ran away. But this thief was not easy to catch. At this time, the security guard secretly complained in his heart. This guy was simply like a circus monkey. Over here. Quick, someone come. Catch him. How big was the security team of this Song Dynasty hotel in Fog City? At this time, 50 to 60 security guards were shuttling back and forth on the first floor of the hotel. The number of security guards who joined the team gradually increased. Damn it! He escaped over there. He went over there. This thief seemed to have brought more chaos to the hotel than expected. Especially in the commercial street inside the hotel, it was a complete mess. When a large number of security guards rushed into the commercial street and started a carpet search, at the glass curtain wall outside the hotel, a small head stretched down, looking at the chaos inside, and then quickly shrank his neck. The thief, who was wearing a black coat, was now stuck to the outer wall of the hotel in an inconceivable way. The thief in black adjusted his body, raising his head and looking at the upper floor of the hotel. He suddenly exerted his strength and began to run on the outer wall of the hotel like a beast. The thief ran all the way from the outer wall of the hotel to the helipad on the top floor of the hotel. He stopped, looking down at the city below from the top of the building. His strange amber eyes carried a trace of urgency. Ajia, Where are you? He curled up his body, tightly wrapping the coat on his body. After a whole day of running, he was already exhausted. He just wanted to take a short rest. Suddenly, a soft and gentle sound of a zither came song. Far away in the sky, flying to the distant sky, in front of the luxurious Behistun Louis XV, Luaccio was playing this song. On the one hand, it was because Miss Maid recognized the origin of this Behistun Louis XV. However, it was not the original one that had been lost in history. It should be a replica made later. Of course, the price was not cheap. Therefore, he held the attitude that it would be a waste if he did not buy it. Boss Luo, who liked to shop in the supermarket on discount days, had an instinct for free things that even the altar couldn't erase. On the other hand, it was naturally because it was better to play it this way. Yi stood beside him, with her hair hanging down. Looking at her master's face and hands, she smiled more. Of course, she was listening more. Far away in the sky was a very short song, a few minutes passed quietly. Naturally, it couldn't be compared with a complete zither song. What a long song! Is it the work of a master? When Luaccio's fingers finally stopped, and the sound lingered like a woman's rest, Miss Maid sighed softly. Boss Luo smiled slightly. It's not a master. As for the origin, it doesn't matter if you don't know it. Miss Maid's finger gently pressed on the white key, the F-sharp sound. Since her master said it didn't matter if she didn't know it, then she didn't need to be curious anymore. They had many ways to kill time. Luaccio didn't intend to use the whole night to cram in knowledge about the Celtic gods, so he moved a little on the chair and let Yi sit down. Let's play a song together? Luaccio said softly. I believe you'll teach me well. 4 hands together. But Miss Maid seemed to want to be a little naughty at this time. Her right hand moved quickly on the white key. Dance of the Bumblebee. Her fingers danced in the air as she looked back with a smile. Their eyes met on the same level. Luaccio liked this kind of lively smile. His hand passed through her hands, and began to play the dance of the bumblebee. They crossed their hands, sometimes looking at each other, sometimes closing their eyes to listen. Suddenly, Luoccio's left hand moved to the back of Miss Maid's hand, as if he was playing the piano, bouncing rapidly on the back of her hand, as if he was responding to her naughty behavior at the beginning. Until the end of the song, when the last lingering sound disappeared in the air, Luaccio looked away from Miss Maid and looked at the balcony. The city lights outside the hotel were reflected on the sliding glass door, and a slightly childish face appeared in the light at the same time. What a polite little guy! Luaccio finally pressed the piano key, and the sound of the piano key bounced out. The glass door of the balcony opened automatically at this time, and a figure fell into the room. But he soon found his balance. Although he looked a little embarrassed, he didn't really fall on the carpet. His body was wrapped in a black coat. The coat was really big and in fact, it didn't fit him well. He looked a little funny in it. Even the fisherman's hat hung down to his eyebrows, and there were some loose places. His hands were hidden in the sleeves. He stood there uneasily, as if he didn't know how to deal with what happened at this time. So he resolutely chose to step back, turning around and rushing out of the balcony, jumping on the wall of the balcony. Luaccio said, "People outside are looking for you. It's not too late to leave when things calm down, at least it will save you some trouble." He squatted on the wall, pressing his hands at the same time. At the moment when the sound came, he was originally jumping, but at this time, he was startled. His jumping posture was not completely completed, and his body lost balance and fell down. He really fell down. Ah! He screamed in horror, and his body suddenly disappeared from the wall. But in the next moment, a hand climbed up the wall again, and then a second hand. At this time, the small head carefully rose from outside the wall, inquiring everything in the room. It saw that the young man in the room was now walking over step by step. Luaccio had already given up. Anyway, if he stayed in the room and didn't go out, something would probably happen. Now he had a kind of attitude of, since it's already here, let's just take it as it comes. His eyes were amber with strange vertical pupils. A few symmetrical long whiskers could be seen on his face, which was stuck with stains and oil. Orc. Miss Maid, who came with Boss Luo, recognized the thief at a glance. This was like a switch which stimulated him in a flash. His amber pupils showed a trace of fierceness. He used his hands to support his body, jumped up high, and then pounced on Luochio and Yu Yi from top to bottom. This kind of sudden attack would trigger Boss Luo's absolute defense from the club. Luochio had to wave his hand. Before he pounced, his body was fanned away by a gentle force, and then he fell into the small swimming pool on the terrace. Splash! The water splashed everywhere. The water in the small swimming pool was actually not deep, but the thief who fell into the water seemed to be drowning. He was desperately struggling in the pool. His coat and hat had already been taken off, and he finally climbed to the edge of the pool with great difficulty. He raised his head, gasping for breath, as if he had just survived a disaster. However, his 2 furry ears were trembling slightly on his head at this moment. His expression was gloomy and uncertain, and his eyes were fixed on the master and servant in front of him. His intention to attack didn't seem to disappear. Luochio and Miss Maid looked at each other. Miss Maid said softly, "Orcs seem to be in a bad situation, so they are more vigilant against people who recognize them. In the Middle Ages, orcs even became the playthings of slaves and nobles. Until today, there are still people engaged in capturing orcs and selling them. This naturally happened in Europe. Luochio, who grew up in Kelowna, naturally didn't see it with his own eyes." "I see." Boss Luo nodded, then looked at the little orc and said in English, "I'm sorry, we don't mean any harm to you." The little orc in the pool at this time shouted angrily and pounced out of the water again. "It's Turkish," Miss Maid reminded at the side. Luochio had to buy the ability to master the language and said again, "We really don't mean any harm, we just don't want you to cause any trouble outside. After all, this hotel has something to do with me more or less." He directly restrained the little orc's next attack. The reason why he did it himself was that compared to Miss Maid, Boss Luo was actually better at delicate work. If Miss Maid restrained the little orc with the black flame, even if she controlled it to the smallest extent, it would more or less bring pain to the little orc. "You see, if we want to attack you, I think you won't have a second chance to attack." Looking at the little orc who was restrained in the air, Luochio was stunned. His windbreaker had been left behind in the water, and he was only wearing a rather thin and ill-fitting male shirt which almost reached his knees. But now it was wet. Whether it was the slightly bright red color on the chest or the looming triangular position, it showed that under the rather masculine appearance at the beginning it was her. Let me go, yen PS1. Correction, yesterday's book was, I'm Really Immortal. I read it, but every time I read it, I silently read Immortal, PS2. Catch up later. Chapter 1282. Ask the room service to prepare some food and some suitable clothes. In the room, the little orc wrapped in a bath towel sat on the floor. Although she was holding a cup of hot tea in her hand, she still looked warily at the guy who easily subdued her. As if to make herself understand, they had been conversing in the language of her hometown since just now. Miss Maid used to have a part-time identity as the world's top mysterious fashion designer, so she was naturally familiar with the measurements. She nodded and didn't need to measure it, because she had already visually measured it. It was a pair of A. So Miss Maid walked slowly to the telephone and dialed the room service number. Unexpectedly, the person who answered the phone was Peter Chan. He really did his best. "Excuse me, is there anything I can help you with? Can you help to prepare clothes?" "Of course, clothes." Peter Chan, who had been waiting for the telephone line of this suite in the room, was slightly stunned at this moment. Hearing the voice of the woman beside Master Chiu, he asked curiously, "What kind of clothes?" "Well, do you have a female sailor suit? Try to get a smaller size, and underwear, Is that okay? Of course. It will be sent to your room soon. Peter Chan quickly agreed and hung up the phone at this moment. Peter Chan quickly went to ask people to prepare clothes. But on the way, he couldn't help but feel strange. The woman's body proportions are very good, but wearing a smaller size seems interesting? Does this Master Chiu actually have some special hobbies? Chen Bide muttered. He was wondering if he should send this information to Miss Ing on the other side of the hemisphere. Perhaps he could get another chance for a promotion and a raise. It was normal for the hotel to prepare the food. As for the clothes, it was actually unnecessary, but recently, he had been squandering a lot. Based on the principle of saving as much as possible, Boss Luo naturally wouldn't be greedy for convenience. Besides, they were not in the wilderness, and the hotel actually prepared the food quite quickly. The food and clothes were delivered at the same time, and it took less than 15 minutes. Luochio went to another room to avoid them. As for the servant girl, she took the food and clothes and communicated with the little orc. It was also worry-free, wasn't it? When Yu Yi appeared in front of him with the little beastman seemed to have let down most of his guard, and his face was full of uneasiness. Boss Luo asked curiously, "What method did you use?" "I just treated her wound and told her that we might be able to help her." Miss Maid smiled and said, "But she needs to collect some rewards. Compared with the kindness of unknown origin, she actually believes in compensation more." True enough. As for business, Luochio didn't have any objections. He began to size up this little orc. She looked about the same age as a human girl of 14 or 15 years old. However, the clothes he was wearing were a little strange. It was a female sailor suit with a short skirt and long red and white socks. He really didn't know where to start complaining, or the person who prepared the clothes was actually very knowledgeable? "Mr. Chen, there seems to be some misunderstanding." Miss Maid's eyes were full of tears. Even if there was a misunderstanding, it shouldn't be a sailor suit. Boss Luo just pretended that he didn't notice this strange point. He nodded and finally went against his original intention. He changed the little orc into another set of clothes. Of course, this change was only for a moment, and there wouldn't be any situation such as tearing the clothes. Simple cropped jeans, a short-sleeved shirt, white flats, and a plain coat. Boss Luo was never good at clothes, but at least it was better than the terrible sailor suit just now, wasn't it? Actually, the clothes just now will make it easier to move. The little orc suddenly said seriously. She tried to make her expression look natural, but she couldn't hide the shock in her heart. "You're a magician? I'm beginning to believe that you might be able to help me." Only a magician who could use all kinds of magic would have the ability to change people's clothes with a press of a button, right? And the ability to imprison herself, just take it that I am. Luochio ignored the little orc's first sentence and smiled. "How should we call you?" "Lael," she said. "Tulip." Luochio nodded slightly and said, "Miss Lael, we are indeed engaged in activities of providing paid services to customers. How can we help you?" Lael was silent for a moment and finally made up her mind. Just like what he said, with such a strong power, it would be easy for him to do anything to her. There was no need to beat around the bush. "I think you can help me find my brother. His name is Oga." Lael gritted her teeth and said her origin. "Originally, my brother and I were caught by a group of damn orc traffickers. They planned to transport us to an auction. But when we passed by here, the ship was suddenly attacked. A group of strange people barged in and fought with those damn orc traffickers. Taking advantage of the chaos, many orcs began to escape. My brother and I were separated in the process of escaping. Originally, I could have found my brother by following his scent, but there was a sudden rain and the scent was washed away. I couldn't find him." She became annoyed. This little orc girl didn't have it easy. She was caught by the orc traffickers and brought to a distant country. Facing an unfamiliar city and language barrier, she thought that she had escaped, but she was separated from her family. "Your brother's name is Oga, right?" Luocio confirmed with Lael. She nodded. Under Lael's astonished gaze, Luocio reached out his hand and grabbed a parchment scroll from the air. He opened it and glanced at it before saying, "I think I've found out where your younger brother is." "Really?" She was so excited that she instantly rushed forward. She almost pounced on Luocio, but at the same time, a gentle force blocked her body. "You? Don't worry, your brother is safe for the time being." Luocio rolled up the sheepskin scroll in his hand and looked at the little orc as if he was thinking about something. "Reward?" Lael seemed to have realized something and asked tentatively. Luocio nodded. There was a certain price to pay to buy information. Naturally, there was an income to be paid. The most basic trading principle of the club had always been there. Even if the club had the authority to open and close a trade at any time, when the trade process was close, it would still be considered to have started. Of course, whether this trade was for profit or a loss, the boss had more freedom to decide. Then 1 month's time. Luocio thought for a moment and said slowly, "Miss Lael, I need you to give me 1 month's time." When Lael heard this, she was first shocked. She was prepared to pay the price, but when she heard that it was a month's time, she subconsciously moved her lips. She clenched her teeth and nodded resolutely. "Okay. As long as you can really help me find my brother, I will accompany you for a month's time. But I won't accept requests that are too perverted. Also, you must take contraceptive measures." At this moment, Boss Luo was glad that he did not drink tea. In his memory, something similar seemed to have happened before? In South America, when he met the lady with the ability of a dimensional observer. Luocio glanced at the servant girl and was surprised to find that she did not have the same kind smile as before. Vaguely, there seemed to be an expression of joy. That seemed to be a good thing. Luocio waved his hand at Lael and said seriously, "Miss Lael, I think you have misunderstood. What I mean is that this information is worth 1 month of your life, which means that after you find your brother, I will take 1 month of your life as a reward. You don't need to accompany me for a month, and I don't have any strange hobbies." "My life?" Lael opened her mouth in confusion. How could he give her his life? Furthermore, it was specifically a month's time? Luocio said, "Let me explain it this way, you need time to find your brother, and we will help you save this time, allowing you to find him in an extremely short period of time. But at that time, when you use normal methods to find your brother may encounter danger, and you may not be able to save him in time. Our service will allow you to avoid such risks, so naturally, we will pay you more. At present, time is equivalent to payment, and it should be the most cost-effective way for you to pay. After all, it's just finding your brother's location." Lael shook her head. She did not understand and did not even know how cost-effective this 1 month's expenditure was. She said seriously, "If you say 1 month, then 1 month. Anyway, you don't need me to accompany you." Ignoring the last sentence, Luocio made a final confirmation to her. "Miss Lael, are you willing to pay 1 month of your life as the price to buy this information about your brother's location from us? You are very young now, and perhaps you don't really care about the length of your life, but when you reach the end of your life, you may regret this 1 month." "Cut the crap." Lael frowned. After all, life withdrawal was too hard to believe. She was more inclined to believe that the other party was kind-hearted, and was just joking to make her feel more comfortable accepting the help. But human magicians were not good people. "Then let's sign the contract." Luocio waved his hand, and a contract parchment opened in front of her. She hesitated for a moment, but in the end, her impatience won over her rationality, and she clenched her teeth and pressed her hand on it. Miraculously, although she could not understand the contents of the contract, its meaning was directly imprinted into her consciousness at this moment. Life payment. Does it really exist? She finally got the information about her brother's current location from Luocio. On the parchment, there seemed to be a map. There were 2 marks on the map, one was red, the other was blue. She raised her head in confusion. Luocio said, The blue arrow is your location, and the red mark is your brother's location. You can easily find your brother, and it's not far away. Lael nodded and didn't say anything else. Instead, he opened the window and jumped out. Soon, he disappeared into the night. Miss Maid walked to the window and closed it. Then she turned around and chuckled. It seems that she is impatient. Luochu said with a faint smile. Speaking of which, why did Peter Chan prepare such clothes? Miss Maid blinked. Master, do you want to see it? Luochu laughed. You are becoming more and more like the variety witch. Miss Maid walked slowly and squatted down beside Luochu. She held his hand and put it on her face. Then she raised her head and asked softly, Master, will you be willing to be my devil? He lowered his head and kissed her. This time it was lips. In the evening. The social work center had already closed, but Will still stayed. If there was a language barrier, the concert was a good way to communicate. Will had always been like this. If he could perform with his heart, he would be able to convey the message to the other party. This child looked 13 or 14 years old. Although he looked like a girl, he was indeed a boy. His two colleagues and band members had already left early to avoid being challenged in their sexual orientation. In general, Will was a person who couldn't watch others suffer without helping. He had to work overtime and act as a temporary psychological counselor. There was no good way to eliminate the child's uneasiness. Will thought of a way. He came to the child with a wooden guitar. Of course, it couldn't be a punk rock type of music. Will chose soft country music. The child had been curling up in the corner of the room since he ate, as if he was afraid of everything and people. When Will came in with the guitar, he even trembled slightly. Will later saw the bruises on the child's back. Some of the bruises were already old, but some were still scarlet and eye-catching. It was obvious that he had been treated violently. Will found it hard to imagine what kind of cruel person would do such a thing to such a delicate and pretty child. I don't mean any harm. I just hope you can calm down. Will said slowly with his softest voice, It's safe here. No one will hurt you. Please believe us, we will help you, although you don't seem to understand. The child just trembled more when Will approached him. Will could only smile and sit in front of the child. After slightly adjusting the strings of the guitar, he began to play with his fingers. Original scenery of hometown. Even if he loved punk rock, he instantly liked this song from a distant country after hearing it. Relax, this is a song taught to me by a friend from the East who came to study music. At the same time, Will began to pluck the strings. The sound was like the wind in the field, low and melodious. Gradually, the delicate boy became less afraid. He even stopped trembling and looked more at Will's hands. He seemed to be attracted by the sound and unconsciously became quiet. At the same time, his eyes became wet. He subconsciously reached out and touched his face, only to find that he was crying. Will glanced at him and didn't stop. Instead, he insisted on finishing the song. Then, he took a tissue and handed it to the boy. He hesitated, but still took it timidly and said something in a low voice. Will couldn't tell which country's language it was, but it didn't hinder the communication between the two sides at this time. It was probably words of thanks. Will smiled and waved the guitar in his hand. Do you want to give it a try? He seemed to understand Will's meaning. He hesitated and nodded. Will handed the guitar to the child and began to fiddle with his posture. He let him pick up the guitar made of rosewood in the correct posture. This is called grade, this is called grade pillar, starting from here is the first grade. Although he didn't know if the child could understand, Will still patiently taught him. Yen P.S. 527. Chapter 1283. In the Platinum Palace, Her Majesty the Queen was holding her beloved pet, but she did not seem to be very comfortable. Because at this time of the night, which was supposed to be a rest time, a large number of people had gathered outside the palace. There were at least 1,000 people standing outside the palace at this time, protesting. And the number of people gathered was still increasing. The anti-riot team had been mobilized. They built a human wall and prepared smoke bombs, water guns, pepper spray, and so on. But if there was no order, they could only stand with their anti-blast shield. The Prime Minister was urgently summoned an hour ago, and there was not only the Prime Minister present, but also those who held real power in the House of Representatives. Outsiders did not know what was being discussed at the center of power, especially the guards. They only needed to be responsible for the safety of the forces and not let anyone get close. There are really more and more people. Looks like they won't disperse until dawn, and there will be more people. Looking through the human wall, the team leader in charge of the anti-blast work shook his head and looked at his companion beside him. Get ready for a long-term confrontation. His companion shrugged and said, It can't be helped. Who asked for several places to be attacked in succession. The point is that the attacks were successful. Now they are probably having a headache about their own intelligence work, or maybe they will also discuss the budget of the intelligence system next year. The group leader didn't say much, but he knew very well that to be able to organize such a large mass protest in such a short period of time, the possibility of it being spontaneous was too low. Perhaps the poisonous snakes of the opposition had already begun to shout. He shook his head again. Ever since the referendum in the British Isles some time ago, the current government had been questioned. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps was heard, and the two men followed the sound. What he saw was a woman in a tuxedo. Her delicate and vigorous facial features seemed to be of Germanic descent, but her long blonde hair was simply tied up. Like a deacon, she walked past the two men with one hand holding a staff member and looked straight ahead. At this time, the companion whistled softly and asked curiously, Who is this lady? Why can she walk freely here? Don't you know? The team leader said casually, She is one of the Queen's bodyguards. She has always been in charge of taking care of the Queen's daily life. I think her name is Lance? Lance. His companion was startled and looked at the back of the lady. She was unusually tall, even taller than most men. Finally, she arrived in front of the room where the Queen, the Prime Minister, and the others were having a discussion. Knock on the door. Excuse me. She opened the door and walked in slowly. After she entered the room, she saw that the scene was immersed in a dignified atmosphere. Her Majesty was just holding her beloved cat and combing its fur, but she seemed to be in a daze. The Prime Minister was standing outside the window, silently smoking a cigarette. When she came in, everyone's eyes were focused on her. However, she acted as if she didn't see it. She walked directly to the Queen's side and put down the tray. There was a cup of water and a small plate. On the plate were a few pills. Your Majesty, it's time to take your medicine. Oh, okay. The Queen nodded subconsciously. Then, she looked at the current ministers and absent-mindedly swallowed the pills. After that, she packed up her things and turned to leave. The Queen's lips moved slightly, but she didn't say anything in the end. Wait, Lancelot. But the Prime Minister spoke. Just as she was about to push open the door, he stopped her. Honorable Mr. Birmingham, what can I do for you? She turned around and asked politely, but she didn't smile. What do you think about this attack? The Prime Minister asked in a low voice. She said indifferently, I'm sorry, Mr. Birmingham, I haven't received any orders yet. I'm asking for your opinion. I don't believe that Mr. Hopkins didn't contact you after such a big thing happened. The Prime Minister frowned. This damn puppet. Mr. Birmingham, my duty is only to protect the Queen's safety. Apart from this, Mr. Hopkins didn't ask me to do anything, nor did he say anything to me. She still said coldly, If you want to know the attitude of the night mechanism from me, you don't have to. It's not as efficient as calling Mr. Hopkins yourself. He didn't answer my call at all. She sneered first. She just glanced at it and said indifferently, If there's nothing else then, goodbye. Wait, Lancelot. Under the gaze of the other leaders of the House of Representatives at the conference table, the Queen finally braced herself and said, Here is a letter secretly sent by the thugs who launched the attack this time. It states their request. I think you can listen to it." She showed a puzzled expression. The Queen smiled bitterly and said, "They call themselves the Doomsday Myth and ask us to give them all of Northern Ireland unconditionally and recognize their independent rule of this area. If we don't agree to this request, then in the next month, they will continue to launch attacks like they did a few hours ago. The next attack will be in 3 days, and the location is unknown." She finally showed a trace of emotion this time. District 2 of the Fog City, where old houses and new high-rise buildings converged. At this time, in the gap between the houses under the shadow of the high-rise buildings, a figure jumped on both sides of the walls with a vigorous posture. It seemed that it would easily break through the gap in the alley. However, when the figure was about to step over one of the buildings, a big black net suddenly appeared above it. The big net instantly covered it. Then, a burst of crazy electric current began to be released in the big net. With a scream, it fell from the top and directly fell into the alley. Several men wearing long black windbreakers and holding a long metal tube in their hands quickly walked to the big net. They helped it up after being hit by the electric current of the big black net. He looked only in his early 20s, wearing a sweater covered with stains. His bangs were already wet with sweat, and at the same time, there were many wounds on his body. The young man who was helped up now lowered his head, his eyes blurred and his mouth foamed. He was already unconscious. Chee! It was the sound of a match being struck. Head Knight Simpton lit a cigarette for himself, and then walked to the young man who was helped up. Simpton reached out his hand and pinched the young man's chin. After a while, he nodded. "Good, the third one. How many more are there?" One of the men in a long black windbreaker said, "According to the list in the hands of the orc traffickers, there are 2 more that haven't been found. Sir, this is the signal tracker we got from the orc traffickers. One of them is not far from us, and the other one is moving quickly. Looking at the direction it's heading, it seems like it wants to meet up with the one that's not moving." Simpton tilted his head and looked at the tracker in his subordinate's hand. He pointed at it and said, "Then let's stop here. Community Center. Find these dirty bastards as soon as possible and drive them away. I really hate the smell of orcs. It makes me unable to sleep at night." "Yes, sir." This was definitely a genius. Will was extremely shocked. It was easy to tell whether a person knew how to play the guitar or not. Even if someone knew how to play the guitar, he couldn't pretend. From the beginning to the beginning, he started to play alone. That was his own fingering technique, his own habit. This handsome kid was obviously imitating his own fingering technique. Even though the child was only able to play the first part of the song slowly and smoothly, and was basically unable to continue towards the end, the child was still trying his best. This child's memory was so amazing, and at the same time, his hands were so nimble. Genius, it seemed like he had picked up a genius. Finally, the kid's hands stopped. He couldn't continue the rest of the song, but he soon started from the beginning, and this time he was even more skilled. Will was a guy who liked to share things with others. He quickly thought of his other 2 friends in the band and wanted to tell them about this. However, he couldn't get through the phone. In fact, no one answered. Will shook his head. Those 2 guys were probably flirting with girls in the bar. Will suddenly thought of a good rock friend who also taught him this song. Will once again listened to this song of original scenery played by this friend of his and instantly had the feeling of crying. That was the realm that Will was pursuing, and also the realm that he firmly believed that music could convey his feelings. Beep, beep, beep. Will? Calling me at this time, what's the matter? The phone was connected. It was not very fluent, and there was some English mixed with some accent. Chung. Do you know, I found a genius. You don't know how incredible this kid is. I believe you will like to know him very much. Will said excitedly. Well, I will definitely want to know him. Are you going to introduce me to him? That was a tone of not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Of course. Are you free tomorrow? Oh, Chung, wait a minute, it seems that someone is coming. I will call you later and tell you the details. Will said and then turned off the phone. At the same time, in the Royal Academy of Music of Fog City University. How strange. He smiled, then shook his head and put down the phone. At the same time, he turned on his laptop and started a video connection. The screen flashed, and soon, a family of 3 appeared in front of him. Among them, the child seemed to have been born not long ago. Oh, let me see my adopted son. Hong Guan. Don't hide it. Look at this kid, he looks so much like me. Like you, my ass, how can he look like you? Ha ha. They began to laugh and chat. There were indeed people from the social work center. Maybe they came to ask for help, for example, some homeless people came back to ask for some food. Will looked back at the kid who was holding the guitar attentively. He smiled and gently closed the door, then walked out. He came to the reception area, but didn't see the homeless people he expected. Instead, he saw several people in black windbreakers. They didn't look like people who came to ask for help. Excuse me, is there anything I can help you with? Will came forward and asked. Is there anyone else here besides you? One of the men asked indifferently. Who are you looking for? Will frowned. He felt that these people didn't come with good intentions. A man standing behind suddenly said, Ah, it's this smell. It's a nauseating smell. He's here, let's do it. After the man finished speaking, several men in black windbreakers nodded and directly passed Will, breaking into the social work center. Wait, you can't go in, this is private property. Before Will could finish his words, a man in a trench coat had already arrived in front of him and directly punched his abdomen. This caused Will to instantly bend over in pain, almost to the point of being unable to breathe. You. What exactly do you want to do? We're saving you, kid. Don't you know how dangerous it is for you? Simpson slowly came from behind, squatting in front of Will, and said with a sneer, at the same time, we're looking for that guy. Don't worry, we won't destroy anything here. Take that guy away and this matter will be over. As he spoke, Simpson shook his head. Immediately, one of his subordinates understood and walked over. He directly pulled Will up and forcefully dragged him into a nearby room. Let me go! Let me go! What are you doing? The door of the room was closed. Inside the room, Will suffered another heavy blow. This time, he directly fell to the ground in pain, retching, and didn't have the strength to get up. At the same time, outside, 2 men in black windbreakers directly dragged that handsome boy out. The boy was terrified, struggling and shouting. He was finally brought in front of Simpson. Oh, little bastard, welcome to Fog City. But you'll leave soon. Simpson smiled, sizing up this handsome boy. This handsome boy suddenly revolted. His eyes instantly turned red, and he suddenly broke free from the 2 men who were holding him, then directly rushed towards Simpson. However, Simpson didn't panic. The moment the boy rushed towards him, he suddenly kicked his long leg, and then like an axe, directly chopped the boy's body. Bang! The boy instantly hit the floor, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Simpson stepped on the boy's back, his eyes cold. A black shadow suddenly flashed in from outside, flashing by Simpson's side at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, the boy under his foot had disappeared. At this moment, his subordinates all took out their weapons. At the reception counter of the social work center, a young girl was standing in front of the boy, protecting him. Anger and resentment, the girl stared at the knights in front of her. Simpson slowly exhaled, stretching out his hand and lightly touching his cheek. The moment the girl flashed by, she left 3 thin blood stains on his cheek. That's why I hate dirty, lowly and rude bastards like you the most. Simpson narrowed his eyes, indifferently saying, in the process of chasing, 2 orcs were provoked and went crazy, so we had no choice but to kill them. Write the report like this. Yes. Yen 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 PS1. Point Mom has a golden keyboard event, ends on the 31st. Vote for me. PS2. Catch up later. Chapter 1284. On the outside, it looked like a luxurious manor, but in fact, it was the place where the Knights of the Round Table gathered. The manor was owned by Sir Hopkins' family. After centuries of continuous construction, it had become a sizable base. In the interrogation room, Reed slowly woke up from a state where he seemed to have taken a tour in hell. Along with his awakening came a pain that seemed to burn his soul. He couldn't help but groan a few times. Then, the first thing he saw was his hands. His hands were badly mutilated, as if they were fished out from a fire, but at the same time, his hands were still shackled. His whole body was chained to a metal chair. What a tenacious vitality, to be able to wake up so quickly! In front of Reed was the pale face of a crying clown, one of the 12 Knights of the Round Table, the clown Dargoni. Not only Dargoni, but Gareth was also present, as well as Mr. Hopkins, who was silently sitting on the side with his cane in hand. This senior cadre of Myth of Doomsday had suffered terrible injuries. The Knights of the Fog City had actually used a lot of precious medicine to pull him back from death. Originally, there was no need to go to the extent of rescuing him. But they had to do this, because if they couldn't get the whereabouts of the other members of Myth of Doomsday from Reed, their contact information, and their next plan, after 3 days, this country would probably usher in a terrible disaster. At this time, under Reed's blank gaze, Mr. Clown conjured a remote control from his palm like a magic trick. Rance seemed to have realized something. Mr. Clown smiled as he extended a finger and slowly pressed it down in front of Rance's eyes. In an instant, a huge current flowed into the metal chair. A shrill scream sounded, and Reed's body, which was mostly burnt, was now twitching crazily. Gareth frowned and couldn't help but say, "Dargoni, we don't have much time. If you electrocute him, how much time do we have to waste?" "Don't worry, I'm counting." Mr. Clown let go of the button and shrugged. "I'm just doing a demonstration that can save us time. I believe that a smart person will know to answer honestly. Am I right, Mr. Reed?" Just as Mr. Clown had said, the electric shock this time did not make Reed pass out. It only made him suffer inhumane torture. But in the face of the clown's question, he weakly raised his head and revealed a disdainful smile. "If I don't tell you, will none of you be able to sleep?" The clown's lips curled up slightly. "Of course, I hope that you will remain silent." He pressed the button again, and the metal chair that was connected to the current emitted visible sparks. Reed's body convulsed even more crazily, and his eyes even turned white. "Reed, just how many people do you have in Doomsday Myth? Where are they hiding? Where is the next target?" Gareth asked quickly. "I hope you can end your current suffering. Please cooperate with us." At the same time, he reached out and snatched the remote control from Mr. Clown's hand. Mr. Clown curled his lips, squatted on the ground, and looked up. Gareth ignored him, and just reached out to grab Reed's hair and raised his head. "As long as you are willing to cooperate, we can give you an extradition order, and let you become a legal inhuman in your country. We will also come forward to negotiate with the Magician Association to revoke their wanted order on you." "Sunshine, you want that too, right?" Reed still sneered, and his voice was intermittent. "You agree to the request." "Sunshine belongs to us," Gareth frowned and said. "Do you know what you are doing? Ceding the whole of Northern Ireland and letting you be independent. Are you announcing your existence to the world? Are you trying to start a war? The Shadow Snake is about to reappear. And this is the beginning from death. Dargoni, you better know when to stop." Looking at Reed falling into a coma after the electric shock, Gareth's gentle face instantly became extremely stern. Mr. Clown was squatting at Gareth's feet, quietly reaching out his finger and pressing the electric shock button. He was so naughty that he had no friends. Gareth shook his head. After the third electric shock, Reed probably wouldn't wake up in a short time. He sighed, walked to Mr. Hopkins, and said with a frown, "Sir, This Reed has done a lot of drug resistance training. Our truth-telling liquid obviously won't work on him. If he insists on not revealing, I'm afraid. Mr. Hopkins rubbed the carving on his cane and remained silent. At this moment, the door of the interrogation room suddenly opened. A woman wearing a purple dress, black eyeshadow, and a great figure slowly walked in. Mr. Clown whistled, stood up, and flicked his fingers. In a flash, 3 flying knives appeared between his fingers. Gareth frowned. Mind which? Gillian Anderson? Why are you here? I asked her to come. Mr. Hopkins sighed. Gareth, I think we need to borrow her ability to get information about the doomsday myth from Reed's mouth in the shortest time possible. At the same time, the woman in the purple dress leisurely walked to Hopkins's side, sat on the armrest of the chair, and reached out to lift Hopkins's chin. Dear Hopkins, I hope you will keep your promise. Don't try to control my mind, Gillian. Facing such a seductive beauty, Hopkins wasn't moved at all. His eyes were as clear as a lake. I will keep my promise, but on the other hand, you can help me. This is just a deal I have no choice but to make. Of course, you are the descendant of the great King Arthur. Ms. Gillian smiled, then glanced at Gareth and Mr. Clown, and then walked to Reed. Gareth still frowned, and looked at Mr. Hopkins inquiringly. I promised her that she would have the opportunity to visit that person. Hopkins shook his head. That person. Gareth instantly thought of something, and his face slightly changed. Sir. Hopkins waved his hand and said, including the time we need to deploy after we get the information about the doomsday myth, if you are confident that you can get the information from Reed's mouth within half an hour, I will not hesitate to terminate this deal. Gareth could only remain silent. Half an hour? With Reed's stubbornness, perhaps he wouldn't be able to say a useful word in half a month. Well, I'm curious, how did you catch Reed, a silver-level magician? Ms. Gillian circled around the metal chair, and her fingers began to stroke Reed's shoulder. This is a ruthless character wanted by the Magician Association for 10 years. Is it the work of Mr. Clown? It seems that your superhuman intuition is a good counter to Reed's transmigration technique. It's not me. Mr. Clown shrugged, not intending to explain in detail. Is that so? Ms. Gillian didn't seem to care, and after circling around, she came in front of Reed and cupped his face with both hands. Her eyes suddenly turned black, completely turned into a pair of completely black eyes. It was extremely strange. About 10 minutes later, Ms. Gillian stretched and smiled. Well, Reed's will has protection, which can prevent the spying of psychic magic. But I've bypassed it. You have about 20 minutes, so ask whatever you want to know as soon as possible. With that, Ms. Gillian threw a coquettish glance at Mr. Clown and reiterated, There are only 20 minutes, it's not good to waste it on me. Mr. Clown had to take back the magic between his fingers. Before leaving, Ms. Gillian suddenly looked at Mr. Hopkins and chuckled. Prison. When I go, I'll inform you. In the room, Will got used to the pain. After catching his breath, he got up with difficulty and looked at the man in a black trench coat in front of him in horror. He seemed to have heard something else. It was the child's shouts coming from outside. Mafia, criminal organization, or something else. Will used the action of climbing up to quietly open the phone in his pocket. He didn't know who he was calling. He only hoped that someone would answer and at the same time, be able to hear the conversation here. You're here to catch that child? Will frowned. His injuries were also caused by you? You actually abused a minor? If you don't want to cause trouble, don't be nosy. The man in the trench coat stood in front of the door with his arms crossed. Don't worry, we'll disappear from your sight and won't trouble you in the future. Will said with slight anger, but you took away an injured child from me. I seriously suspect that you're doing some illegal activities, even illegally imprisoning and abusing a minor. The man in the trench coat shook his head, seemingly impatient, but still said casually, You don't want to know the origin of the child you're talking about. What's your hand doing? With that, he took a step forward, pinched Will's arm and forcibly pulled it out. "Phone? Are you playing tricks? Let me go. You criminals! Let me go." The man in the trench coat threw Will's phone to the ground, then pulled him and threw him towards the wall. "It seems that letting you sleep is a better choice." He sneered and walked towards Will. Will watched in horror. But at this moment, there was a loud noise outside the door. It seemed to be smashing. The man in the trench coat frowned, waved his hand again, and knocked Will to the ground. He was in so much pain that he couldn't even get up. "I'll deal with you later." With that, the man in the trench coat opened the door and walked out. Outside, the man in the trench coat had already fallen to the ground, and the reception area of the community center was already in a mess. However, the orc siblings had already been forced into a corner. They had too many ways to deal with orcs, not to mention the miner. Simpton didn't make a move, but just watched coldly. "Sir? What's going on?" The man who was watching Will hurriedly walked over, but Simpton just nodded. The man glanced and frowned. "Sir, since the 2 targets have been found," what he received was Simpton's cold gaze. He could only swallow his words, then looked at the 2 little orcs in the corner. "Sister." The boy hid behind the girl in fear. The girl protected him with one hand, while staring at the enemies in front of her, saying in a low voice, "Olga, I'll keep them busy. You run when you have the chance, you keep running. After you leave this place, run towards the tallest building. You must go to the 17th floor, the room with the swimming pool. There might be someone there who can protect you. But that guy is a long story. You have to be careful." "Sister, I won't go. Be good." The girl looked into the boy's eyes. "I promise I'll be fine. Then I'll go find you." As she spoke, the girl grabbed the boy's arm and threw him out. At the same time, she kicked her body and crashed into one of the men in a black windbreaker. Her growth hadn't reached the level of an orc. She was agile, but not strong enough. This collision didn't make a trained knight fall to the ground. But to her horror, her actions didn't work. When she came back to her senses, she saw that Olga didn't escape. Instead, Simpton easily grabbed his leg and lifted him up, then he heavily fell to the ground. Simpton smiled and lifted his windbreaker. A narrow sword flew out and was about to pierce through Olga's body. "No!" The girl screamed in despair. At this moment, white fur started to grow all over her body, and her amber eyes turned dark red. Chee 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 chee. In the blink of an eye, a white gas suddenly spewed out. This white gas was emitted at an extremely fast speed, instantly filling the entire reception room. At the same time, an ear-piercing buzzing sound rang out from the reception room. Simpton covered his nose and waved his arm to get rid of the white gas. When some of the gas dissipated, a fire extinguisher was seen rolling on the ground. But the 2 little orcs were nowhere to be seen. "Where are they?" Outside the community center, Will carried the delicate boy and hurriedly got into a yellow car. Then, he rushed out of the community center. As a Grand Knight of the Night Organization, he actually let 2 orcs escape under his nose. Simpton's face instantly became gloomy. How did you watch?" "I'm sorry, sir. I already beat him to the ground. I didn't expect." The man lowered his head and hurriedly apologized. "Humph. That's not enough. Quickly chase after him," Simpton said angrily. The man hurriedly nodded, looking at the yellow car running away. A trace of relief flashed across his face. Yen P.S. 6/27. Chapter 1285. The yellow Ford Focus sped along the road. Will's eyes were still filled with panic. His lips were dry. From the rearview mirror, he could clearly see the 2 black Audi A3s. The group of people in black were still chasing after them. But after crossing the next street, they would be able to see the entrance of the police station. Once they reached there, they would be safe, right? He wanted to ask the kid about the background of those people. But even the girl who appeared later and seemed to be very close to the boy was unable to communicate with him. The girl and the boy were sitting in the back seat of the car. He doesn't seem to understand what we are saying, right, Olga? Lael frowned. What's wrong with him? Yes, he doesn't understand. Sister, don't worry. The boy. Olga nodded and then told her what happened in the afternoon. Sister, this big brother saved us. If he didn't create chaos. Lael hugged Olga and comforted him softly. Sister knows that there are good people among humans. Just like the town we lived in when we were young. The uncles and aunts in the town were all good people. But did you forget how scared they were when they found out about our identity? Sister, Lael stroked Olga's back. They are all good people. Our identity will only bring them trouble. Look, including the person driving the car. Didn't he get into trouble because of us? Olga was silent. Lael looked back and saw Simpton and his men following closely behind. She gradually became anxious. She looked ahead and realized that they were getting further and further away from the hotel. Only then did she realize that the man driving in front of her had his own plans from the start. Don't go in this direction, go there. There. Lael reached over the back of the seat and pointed at the tall building in the distance from Will's side. That is Song Dynasty Hotel? Will was startled. You want to go there? No, we should be going to the police station. Police station? Police cop. Okay. Lael shook her head and her expression became anxious. She kept saying something. Bang! While they were chatting, the yellow Ford Focus suddenly jolted. The Audi 3 behind it had caught up and crashed into the rear of the Ford Focus. Don't hit my car. I still have 2 years of loans. Will stuck his head out of the car window and shouted angrily. Lael was still mumbling at the side. Will felt like his head was inflated like a balloon, but at that moment, he suddenly stepped on the brake. The inertia caused Lael's body to crash into the front seat. But at the same time, the two Audi 3s behind them could not stop at all. Bang bang! In front of the intersection, Ford Focus was pushed out of the pedestrian line. Lael turned around and got up. He glared furiously at Will and shouted, "What are you doing?" This time, even though there was a language barrier, Will was able to understand the reason behind the girl's roar. Red light. Lael shuddered and abruptly reached out to grab Will by the back of his collar. Then, he flung him to the back seat in a doggy crawl position. Without a second thought, the girl grabbed the driver's seat and stepped on the accelerator. Just like that, she charged into the traffic ahead. Will opened his eyes wide. He had a feeling that the world was spinning. He could even foresee the situation where the traffic police would come knocking on his door. However, the two Audi 3s behind them did not seem to be catching up. Did they really get rid of them? He got up and looked at the back window. He saw that the two Audi 3s had turned around at the intersection and were driving in the opposite direction. They actually called for an emergency assembly at this time? In the Audi 3, Simpton frowned. Just as he was about to catch the two little orcs, the highest assembly order from the Knights of the Fog City was directly sent to his mobile phone. Simpton could only give up on the pursuit of the little orcs and turn back. In Simpton's career, he had only received this kind of highest assembly order twice, including this one. The last time was 10 years ago. It was for a crusade against that sinner. The yellow Ford Focus finally came to a stop. Will listened to the clicking sounds of his new car. His legs felt weak as he pushed open the door and got out of the car. It's over. This kind of serious violation of regulations, the insurance won't pay for it, Will sighed heavily. Lael took Olga's hand and walked to Will. Although you don't understand, I'm still very grateful for your care for my brother. We don't want to implicate you, so let's just leave it at that. After saying that, Lael bowed deeply to Will. Then, he clenched his teeth and tore off a necklace from his neck. He stuffed it into Will's hand and pulled Olga away. Will was startled. He looked at the necklace in his hand. It was made of string, and the pendant was polished very smooth. It looked like some kind of bone or stone mineral. Is this compensation? Will seemed to have understood Lael's meaning. He looked at the two little guys who seemed to be at a loss. He opened his mouth. Finally, he chose to walk up quickly and blocked in front of the siblings. Lael frowned. Will could only make a hand gesture. It's so late, where are you going? You don't want to go to the police station, right? Which hotel are you going to? Do you know anyone there? I don't know if the people chasing you will show up. How about I send you there? Lael and Olga glanced at each other. Finally, Lael chose to ignore Will's hand gesture. He pulled Olga with one hand and directly ran away. Will hurriedly chased after them, but in the blink of an eye, he could not see the two children anymore. He could not help but be stunned in place. After a long while, he smiled bitterly and returned to his tattered car. His face was bitter like a gourd. Simpson strode along the corridor. The sound of his leather boots hitting the floor was very clear. He pushed open the door. The battle conference room of the night organization. Simpson looked around and found that all the grand knights of the night organization in the headquarters of Fog City, including the 12 guarding knights, were all here. Everyone's eyes fell on Simpson. He walked up and faced Mr. Hopkins. Sorry, I'm late. I'm on the way to hunt down orcs. Hopkins waved his hand and interrupted Simpson's statement. It's okay. Take a seat, Simpson. You've already found most of the orcs. We'll talk about the rest later. Simpson nodded. Then he walked to his seat and sat down. In front of his seat there was a document. Everyone had this document in front of them. He hurriedly opened it and started reading. Hopkins cleared his throat. Simpson, read and listen at the same time. So far, we've already gotten the information of most of the members of Mythology of Doomsday from Rant, a senior officer of Mythology of Doomsday. We also know their next target. Everyone, if we can't organize the operation of Mythology of Doomsday, a terrible disaster will befall our country. Therefore, this operation will involve all the night organizations in the country. We must catch all of these thugs in one fell swoop before the next attack of the Doomsday Myth. Now I'll distribute your work. The operation deployment meeting lasted for an hour. After waiting for orders, everyone in the night organization in the headquarters of Fog City left to prepare the equipment and supplies for this operation. Outside the war conference room, Gareth walked out with the meeting notes in his hand. He had a lot on his mind. At this time, a figure quickly walked up to him. Klein? Gareth was startled. Didn't I approve your leave and let you go back to rest? I also received the assembly order. Klein hurriedly said, Mr. Gareth, what happened? Could it be related to the attacks tonight? Is there anything I can do to help? Probationary Knight Klein. Gareth said seriously. Yes, sir. Klein immediately stood at attention and raised his head. Gareth said calmly, The order I'm giving you now is, go back to your shoe shop immediately and continue your leave. Sir, my injury doesn't affect my movement. Gareth only patted Klein's shoulder and didn't say anything else. He directly turned and left. Klein stood there in a daze, feeling quite down. Kid, you're blocking my way. Suddenly, a figure appeared in front of Klein. He raised his head and saw Simpson with an indifferent expression. Klein hurriedly stood at attention again and moved aside, saying respectfully, Mr. Simpson, I'm sorry. Okay. Simpson casually replied and walked past Klein. He suddenly stopped and turned back. Oh, right? I'll give you a suggestion, kid. Klein still stood at attention, raised his head and raised his chest, looking straight ahead. I'm very willing to listen. If you can ensure that you're in the best condition, you're just a burden on the battlefield. Klein opened his mouth, but Simpson had already walked away. Klein took a deep breath and bowed deeply to Simpson's back. Thank you for your advice, Mr. Simpson. I'll remember it in my heart. Go away. Simpson casually waved his hand as a response. Da-da-da-da-da-da. The yellow Ford Focus finally arrived at the entrance of the Social Work Center. The hood of the car was smoking. Will got off the car and looked at the smoking hood, smiling bitterly. Okay, I know you've tried your best. Will. At this time, A man quickly walked out of the social worker center and jogged in front of Will with a worried look on his face. Cheng? Will was stunned and recognized the man. Why are you here? The man. Cheng Iran said angrily. Didn't you call me and say a lot of strange things? Then you suddenly hung up. I was a bit worried, so I came to see you. What's going on here? Are you being robbed here? I've called the police, they're still inside. So he called you. I thought no one would pick up. Will sighed, saying, Let's go in and meet the police first. My experience tonight is enough to make a movie. Hey buddy, have you ever tried to race on the streets of Fog City like in movies? In the presidential suite on the 17th floor of the hotel, Boss Luo sat quietly with a whiteboard in front of him. As for the servant girl, she was wearing round-rimmed glasses and a black dress. Her stockings wrapped her legs well. Because the floor was covered with a carpet, she didn't wear high heels that should have been worn. The servant girl also held a marker pen and a pointer, tapping on the whiteboard. Generally speaking, this is the process of the destruction of the Celtic gods. Master, is there anything else you don't understand? Boss Luo smiled slightly, pointing at his temple, chuckling. I remember, teacher. At this time, the news report was broadcasted on the TV. The Prime Minister appeared on the screen and began to speak about several terrorist attacks in the British Empire a few hours ago. We will severely punish these thugs. Luochu lowered the volume of the TV, saying casually, It seems that it's not over yet. After all, the number of casualties hurt the government and citizens. The servant girl said softly, I guess by tomorrow, the whole world will be talking about it. Well, the security of this hotel is really not good enough. It seems that all the efforts were spent on strange arrangement. She looked towards the direction of the balcony. Outside the glass door, two small figures were hanging in the wind. They were the orc girl and her brother Olga. The orc girl directly pushed open the glass door and walked in. Olga, who followed behind her, grabbed the corner of his sister's clothes, looking very uneasy. Sir, you really like this way of entering the door. Miss Maid walked back to her master and waited quietly behind him. It's not easy for me to come in normally, right? The orc girl fearlessly met the servant girl's gaze. Why did she change into another set of clothes? It seemed that this magician really had some strange hobbies. Miss Lael, congratulations on finding your brother. Luo Qiu smiled slightly, looking at the boy behind the orc girl. Luo Qiu couldn't help but take a second look at the boy's delicate face, like a young girl's. No matter if it was Lael or this boy, they were orcs. Shouldn't orcs be the kind in Blizzard's games? As he met more and more non-humans, Luo Qiu gradually became interested in the form of these non-human creatures. What a beautiful boy! Lael suddenly blocked in front of Olga, her eyes full of vigilance. Luo Qiu didn't mind, just said casually, Miss Lael, since you found your brother, is there anything else? Lael frowned. Didn't you take your reward? I did find my brother because of your help, and I also helped him escape danger. Generally speaking, I'm very grateful for your help. But since I promised to give you a reward, I won't go back on my words. Come, what do I have to do? Well, Luo Qiu smiled. Actually, the moment you found your brother, miss, you didn't have to come again. I gave it to you? When Lael was startled, she didn't feel anything, but she believed that there was no free lunch in this world, so she hesitated for a moment, then asked tentatively, You really don't need me to accompany you for a month? Such a straightforward character. Boss Luo didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that the previous explanation was in vain. Baidu Search 81 Chinese Network. No advertising message. Chapter 1286. Beside the bed, Lael was carefully arranging the blanket for Olga. He had already fallen asleep. When there was a soft knock on the door, Miss Maid pushed the door open and walked in. At the same time, she put down some clothes. Lael took a look and opened her mouth. This woman changed another set of clothes. How many clothes does she have to change in one night? After Miss Maid put down the clothes, she nodded with a smile and turned around to leave. She didn't say anything. Lael hesitated for a moment and quickly chased after her. Wait a minute. In front of the door, Lael gently closed the door and lowered her voice at the same time. What's the matter, Miss Lael? Yu asked indifferently. Lael stuttered for a moment and then said in a low voice, thank you for letting us stay for the night. If you want to thank us, shouldn't you thank us in person? Lael opened his mouth and looked up, only to see the servant girl's faint smile. In the room, in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, Luacio's legs were covered with a thin blanket. There was only a light for reading beside him. The book he was reading was prepared in the study room of the suite. It was a book about British folklore. When Yu brought Lael in, Boss Luo happened to see the story of Mordred's rebellion. Miss Lael, what's the matter? Luacio closed the book and stood up. He casually put down the blanket. Miss Lael said that she wants to thank you in person, Master. Yu came to Luacio's side and said softly. He looked at the orc girl and found that the beast ears on her head were slightly trembling. She seemed to be very nervous, so he said, Do you like to drink tea, Miss Lael? Luacio smiled and said, The tea made by Miss Maid is very delicious. Yu. As he said, Luacio casually snapped his fingers. On the small round table in the corner of the study room, a tea set quietly appeared. Lael was slightly surprised. What was more surprising was that she was familiar with this tea set. This was the tea set commonly used in the country where she was born. Fruit tea or black tea? Miss Maid looked at Lael and asked with a smile. There are many fresh fruits in the kitchen. There are also some freshly picked cherries. Black tea is fine. Lael quickly waved her hand. You don't need to trouble yourself, actually. Please sit down, Miss Lael. Luocio came to the table, pulled out a chair, and then made an inviting gesture. Lael stepped a little bit. She had never been treated like this before. In other words, the people who took care of her and Olga on the farm were all casual and carefree people. They would sing and dance in front of the bonfire. They would also drink heartily during the harvest season. The smell of hops would always spread in the night wind along with the fragrance of tulips. Are you thinking of your family? Lael couldn't remember how she sat down and how she suddenly fell into her memories. But such a question brought her back to reality from her beautiful memories. I don't have a family, Lael said subconsciously, but then she bit her lips lightly. I have no family except Olga. As she said, she didn't forget to look at the beautiful woman who claimed to be a maid's way of making tea. It was really the way of her country. How many spoons of white sugar? 4. Miss Maid clearly received such a request. She gently lifted the lace on her sleeve with her left hand and started to make sugar with her right hand. She suddenly felt that she was like an ugly duckling in a story in front of these two people. Have you thought about how to leave? Luacio's question temporarily interrupted Lael's wild thought. She quickly said, Tomorrow morning, I will take Olga and leave here. I will definitely not give you any more trouble. I have said that I have already received the reward for finding your brother. Luacio had always been very patient. He patiently said, Do you still remember the contract you signed? It has already returned to me. And your lifespan has also been reduced by 1 month. Of course, you are still young, so you don't feel anything. I heard that orcs have a longer lifespan than ordinary people, so you probably don't feel anything. Lael subconsciously said, I am a mixed blood. My lifespan is about the same as ordinary people. As soon as she finished speaking, she regretted it. Would the other party be curious and ask about her background? How was she supposed to answer him? If you want to leave, it seems to be a little troublesome for Miss Lael. Luacio didn't ask further. Instead, he thought and said, You were caught by orc traffickers. You don't have any identification with you, so you might not be able to use normal means of transportation. Lael immediately heaved a sigh of relief and quickly said, It's okay. We can sneak into the carriage of the train to load goods. This way, we don't have to go through so many troublesome checks. We used to. She quickly pursed her lips and lowered her head. Luochu thought for a while. He opened his palm and a document appeared. There was also a mobile phone. He pushed these things in front of Lael. This is the schedule of the train going through the undersea tunnel tomorrow. In addition, this mobile phone has a translation software. I hope it will be of some help to Miss Lael on your return journey. Lael had already experienced the pain of not being able to speak. She knew about the modern technology and also thought about the translation problem of the mobile phone. However, she was penniless. If she really wanted to get these things in this strange foreign country, she would probably have to resort to illegal means or robbing. The information and the mobile phone had undoubtedly helped her a lot. She was already used to the mysterious magician's ability to make things appear out of thin air. Anyway, she had heard rumors about magicians since she was a child. They were all magicians who had various magical powers. Why, Luochu said, you can take it as a little self-satisfaction. She didn't remember how she walked out of the study room. She only remembered that the magician's smile was very gentle and the maid's black tea was very fragrant. In the room, Ajia was still sleeping soundly. Lael sat at the bedside. Although she was exhausted to the extreme, she still cheered up. She began to look at the documents and mobile phone in her hands, planning to leave tomorrow. In the study room, Luochu returned to the place where he started to read. Miss Maid sat on his lap on the carpet like a cat, lying on his lap. The skirt was loose and round, like a rose. Master, are we just going to let them go like this? Miss Maid raised her head. Luochu looked down and touched her face with his fingers. Before leaving, I wrote a sentence to myself. I'm thinking, in a short period of time, if it's not irresistible, I'll try my best to do something that may be unprofitable to pass this stage temporarily. As he said, he raised his left hand. There was a string of agarwood Buddha beads on his wrist. Similar to relief? Luochu smiled and raised Miss Maid's chin. Don't enterprises also do charity? Self-satisfaction? Miss Maid's eyes were full of tears. Self-realization. Luochu lowered his head. He started to like the feeling of touching this pair of lips. After a long time, when they separated, Luochu said softly, "When I'm ready, I'll help you get your body back in heaven." Okay, on the island, an armed helicopter slowly landed. The wind blew the people who were directing the landing, their clothes fluttered. Finally, the helicopter landed and the cabin door opened. A charming woman wearing a purple dress walked down. She was only one person, the spirit witch, Jillian. At the same time, more than 10 men with guns came from all directions. The muzzles of these guns were undoubtedly pointed at the spirit witch. I'm just a visitor, can't I be treated with courtesy? Jillian let out a soft sigh. At this moment, a brown-haired man in a white suit and sunglasses slowly walked over from behind the gun-wielding man. We're facing a soul which ranked 5th on the Magician Association's which wanted list. I think we're being polite enough, Madam Jillian. Can I say that this ranking is so high because I was falsely accused? The witch covered her mouth and chuckled. The man in white said indifferently, Ms. Jillian, according to Sir Hopkins's instructions, you only have 20 minutes of visiting time. After 20 minutes, no matter if you come out or not, we will close the entrance of the prison. Please watch the time. The witch smiled and said, He is known as the most powerful Grand Knight below the 12 Knights, and he was also born blind. It can be said that he is my nemesis. Am I really that unpopular with Mr. Lino? Please. The man in white. Lino moved to the side. At this time, the men with guns also separated into 2 rows to let the lady pass. She raised her head and looked in front of her. On the small hill of the island, there was a castle built with ancient stone. Jillian walked gracefully like a Persian cat. A violet perfumed smell was carried by the wind. She wanted to walk to the castle on the hill and whispered. The spacious gate stood majestically, the pillars of solid stone pierced the sky. Heavenly power was as insignificant as human strength. How could a huge building be regarded as a collapsed nest? The fortress of steel was majestic and lofty. What are you talking about? Among the men with guns, one of them seemed to be in a state of extreme tension. At this time, he shouted loudly and his finger on the trigger was almost pressed down. Mr. Lino stretched out his hand and pressed it down. Although he was born blind, in contrast, his other senses were far superior to ordinary people. This is one of the passages in Edinburgh prison. The character butler chanted at the prison gate when he was rejected for visiting. Lino said indifferently, "It's not a spell." Mr. Lino is also a sentimental person. The witch looked back and smiled. As she smiled, the man who shouted at her to stop suddenly screamed in horror. He even dropped the weapon in his hand in panic and screamed, "Snake! Snake!" Not only was he shocked, but at this moment, he seemed to have seen the most terrifying thing, and his whole person was in a state of uncontrollable state. Great Knight Lino frowned and hit the back of the man's neck with his hand, knocking him out on the ground. At the same time, he looked at the witch and said indifferently, "Madame Julienne, I don't mind including your travel time into the visiting time, if you like to stay here. I want to take back my compliment." The witch turned and set off again, but this time, her pace was slightly faster. From the helipad to the castle on the hill, it only took them about half an hour to walk to the castle. At this moment, Lino took out a key from a necklace around his neck. He walked to the castle gate and inserted the key into the hole in the center of the gate. The ancient gate then slowly descended. At the entrance, it was pitch black. Remember, you only have 20 minutes. That person, at this time, if there are no accidents, he should be on the east wing of the tower. Go. I strongly request that these 20 minutes start from the moment we meet, and not from the moment I step in here. Madame Julienne's voice suddenly became calm. Lino acted as if he did not hear her. He waved his hand, and a subordinate took out an electronic timer. After Lino said start, he pressed the timer button. What a boring and heartless man! The witch looked at him bitterly, then lifted her skirt and walked into the castle gate. Lino closed the gate of the castle once again, and stood in front of the gate. He took a deep breath and clenched his fists, as if he was holding a sword. He stood there with a serious expression on his face. This is the first time I've seen Mr. Lino so serious. The subordinates whispered to each other. There's nothing we can do about it. After all, the person locked inside is the one who paralyzed almost all the round table mechanisms in Great Britain 100 years ago. He even killed 5 of the 12 round table members. He's the fiercest and most evil knight in history. Can someone really live for so long? I want to say that he's cursed. On the spiral staircase, Madame Julienne held an oil lamp in her hand and walked up step by step. This spiral staircase had no end and no one could see behind her. Only the light of the lamp shone in the darkness. Finally, after more than 10 minutes, Madame Witch reached the top of the tower. The door in front of her was ajar and was not locked. She pushed it open. In the room, there was only the orange light of the candle. The light and shadow swayed along with the flickering of the candle. On the blue stone wall, there was a shadow. Julienne took a deep breath and looked at the shadow on the wall. She was stunned for a moment before she turned to look at the shadow's body. At the only window of the room in the tower, she saw a black-haired man sitting on the windowsill. His hair was long and black, almost reaching the ground. His hands and feet were shackled at the same time. He was holding a small book in his hand. Apparently, before Madame Witch came, he was reading under the light and was still immersed in the world of the book. He heard the sound, so he raised his head, it seemed. Under the candlelight and moonlight, a pale face that was as thin as a patient with terminal anorexia appeared in front of Madame Witch. She opened her mouth and called out softly, "Mordred." Baidu search 81 Chinese network. No advertising message. Chapter 1287. The cloud moved, and the thin man sitting on the windowsill walked down. The chains on the shackles made a crisp sound. He was really thin, and the shackles on his hands and feet seemed to be heavier than his weight. "Alice!" The man called Mordred had a hoarse voice, as if his vocal cords had been burned. "You haven't talked for a long time?" Miss Witch looked at him and shook her head. "But I'm not Alice. I'm her daughter, Jillian." "Daughter?" He looked a little confused, and then he was silent, as if he was recalling something. The witch was also frowning. She seemed to be talking to herself, but also seemed to be talking to him. 60 years of imprisonment and the poison created by the collaboration of 100 secret apothecaries of the Magicians' Association has messed up your mind and memory. Look at me, Mordred. You should remember who you are. He stood there motionlessly like a skeleton. This castle had a terrible anti-magic ability. She couldn't use any power here. That was why Hopkins agreed to let her visit him. Even so, she was searched very carefully before the visit to make sure that she didn't hide anything. But she still brought something with her. The witch lifted her skirt and put her hand under it. At this moment, there was a sensitive expression on her face. She was in a state of physical pleasure. She sighed slowly, and her eyes were like phosphorescence. She took back her hand, and then there was a small glass bottle. She took the bottle, walked slowly to Mordred, and opened the bottle. "It took me 30 years, and I was wanted by the Magicians' Association for 30 years, to find the materials to make this universal deciphering potion." He didn't move and was completely immersed in his own memories. Seeing this, Miss Witch had to pinch his chin and pour the liquid in the bottle into his mouth. When the potion finally went down his throat and into his body, Miss Witch slowly stepped back. In fact, even she wasn't sure that this potion could break the poison in this man's body. Time passed little by little. Mordred still stood there motionless. Jillian couldn't help but frown. Did she fail? Just as her heart sank, Mordred suddenly showed a pained expression. He grabbed his own neck and knelt on the ground, letting out a painful retching sound. Black liquid was spat out from his mouth, just like that, and accompanying it was an unpleasant stench. This type of retching continued. The amount of black liquid Mordred spat out was even more than the amount of water his body was supposed to contain. A lot of time had passed, much longer than the witch's visiting hours. Finally, the black liquid in Mordred's body seemed to have been completely spat out, but he was still clutching his neck with both hands, kneeling on the ground with his head lowered. What's wrong with you, Mordred?" Jillian asked hesitantly. He raised his head and his eyes regained their clarity. At the same time, he slowly stood up. "I'm just sorting out the memories of the past few decades." "Are you really Alice's daughter?" "I inherited my mother's power and am also a soul witch." Jillian nodded. "Perhaps after we leave this castle, I can prove it to you. How do you feel? Has the antidote completely removed the poison in your body?" "About 15% has been removed." Mordred was silent for a while. "But it's enough. Only 15%? How is that possible?" Jillian frowned and coldly snorted. "That damn secret pharmacist. He really didn't try his best." Mordred looked at his hands. "The poison in my body was made by hundreds of secret pharmacists, and there was no lack of secret pharmacists among them. Although I don't know the origin of the secret pharmacist you found, if he could do this alone, he can already be considered a genius. Moreover, 15% is enough." "Really?" Jillian was pleasantly surprised. "Are you sure you can leave this prison? To be honest, this is a gamble. If I can't wake you up, I'm afraid I'll be locked up here forever. The best outcome is that I'll be handed over to the Magician Association by the Round Table. I'll leave here." As he spoke, he also looked at the witch. She didn't see a trace of nostalgia in his eyes. "But before you leave, you need to tell me. Why did you come to me and help me detoxify?" Akshay record. The witch's eyes flashed with fanaticism. She said word by word, "Mordred, I need you to help me get it. A document that can change history." He closed his eyes and seemed to be thinking about something. The witch couldn't help but feel a little nervous. If the man in front of her didn't agree, then all her previous plans would probably— "Okay, I promise you." He opened his eyes and nodded indifferently. "Consider it as a reward for bringing me the antidote, but you have to think about it. You only have this wish. If you use it, it's gone." The witch chuckled. "It's said that no matter who it is, as long as they can save you from this prison, they can ask you to do one thing. I think my request isn't a waste. Although what I'm using is a favor from the strongest knight known as a demigod." "A demigod?" He looked at the witch strangely. Under her puzzled gaze, he said indifferently, "I'm not a demigod for a long time. Let's go. After I help you find the document, I'll come back. The book here. I haven't finished reading yet." "Come back?" She was shocked. She didn't understand what he meant, but seeing that Mordred had already walked out of the door, she had to quickly follow. However, the shackles and chains on Mordred's hands and legs were still there. Listening to the sound of the chains dragging when he walked, the witch couldn't help but frown. This so-called demigod, the fiercest and evilest knight in history, seemed to be very ordinary. "Mr. Lino, it's been almost an hour." They began to remind Lino, who had been holding his sword since an hour ago. But he didn't respond. He just closed his eyes and was in the most solemn state of alert. The subordinates didn't care. No one had ever been able to walk out of this prison. For the past half a century, all the sinners who were locked in there eventually committed suicide out of madness, not only because there was a terrifying anti-magic power inside, but also because there were even more powerful guards inside. "Why did you suddenly stop? There's still some distance to the door." The witch couldn't help but frown. She had walked this path before. At that time, she didn't think much of it, but she felt a little depressed because there were many knight statues on both sides of the path. "You should step back a little. It's a little troublesome to go through here," Mordred suddenly said. "Troublesome?" The witch was stunned. He said casually, "These statues contain the heroic souls of the knights who sacrificed themselves in the past. They are at least at the level of a Grand Knight, and there are even 12 Grand Knights. Of course, if they are just heroic souls, they can't be compared to when they were alive." These? The witch frowned. "They are just ordinary statues." "For you," Mordred said indifferently. He then took a step forward. "They will only wake up when I try to walk through here." As if to prove what he said, the moment he took another step forward, the statues on both sides of the path suddenly opened their eyes. A strong murderous aura was emitted from their bodies, and then gathered into a terrifying killing intent. In just a moment, the witch's face turned pale, as if her soul was pierced by countless sharp swords. "This is just the leakage of the aura." Jillian looked at the statues in horror as they came to life. They walked down from the pedestals and pulled out their weapons at the same time. "Impossible to get out! Impossible to get out!" Jillian screamed in her heart. Mordred continued to walk forward. "Although I don't know what method you used to get them to let you in and give you this opportunity to visit, but don't think that they are willing to give you a chance because you are smart. It's just because they have absolute confidence. Even if you come in, you can't do anything." She could only smile bitterly. These were the famous Grand Knights and the 12 Round Table. Suddenly, a statue of a knight holding a golden sword slowly walked in front of Mordred. It was at least 2 heads taller than Mordred. Mordred looked up. "Cajun, do you want me to kill you again?" "Cajun?" Jillian was very familiar with the history of the Grand Knight. She looked at the golden sword in the knight's hand and couldn't help but exclaim. "Cajun? Could he be the Golden Sky Knight who inherited the name of Gawain 100 years ago, Cajun Alexander?" Mordred looked back at Jillian. But at this moment, the knight's statue in front of him slowly raised the golden sword in its hand and slashed down without any hesitation. "Watch out!" Looking at this scene, she couldn't help but cry out in fear. But at the same time, when the golden sword slashed down, her eyes widened. That golden sword was extremely sharp, and with a portion of the power of a celestial gold knight, it could even easily cut through a steel plate. However, such a sharp golden sword was unable to cut through Mordred's shoulder at this moment. But the enormous force of the sword still caused Mordred's legs to sink into the ground. Could it be that his body was harder than steel? The witch opened her mouth slightly. "Since you are already dead, it is better for you to rest in peace," Mordred said indifferently. "Why should I stay in this world that is already doomed?" The statue suddenly opened its mouth and let out a roar. It raised the sword again and slashed down. But this time, Mordred raised his hands and the shackles on his hands were directly cut off. Mordred's figure instantly disappeared. At least, the witch couldn't see his movements. In the blink of an eye, when she saw Mordred again, he was holding the golden sword in his right hand. And the arm of the golden sky knight statue had disappeared. "Rest in peace. It is useless to guard me." As he said that, Mordred squatted down and placed the golden sword behind his back. He suddenly twisted his body, and the golden sword slashed out from behind him. The anti-magic power in the castle seemed to have ignored this man. On the golden sword, a bright light was emitted. Then, the blade of the half-moon surged and swept across. One by one, the statues were sliced apart by the crescent-shaped sword light. The desolate killing intent that made Jillian tremble in fear instantly dissipated. In just a few short seconds, the corridor was left with countless pieces of rubble. Streaks of light slowly rose from the shattered statues, then converged, spiraled, and turned into a spiral of light, directly colliding with Mordred. He put down the golden sword in his hand and stretched out his left hand to block the spiral of light. The wind was like a hurricane. The anti-magic power in the castle was still in effect. The witch had no choice but to lean forward. But her body was still blown away by the strong wind. Finally, the strong wind slowly dissipated. When everything calmed down, the witch saw Mordred standing in the middle of countless broken bodies. For a moment, she thought she saw him standing in the middle of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. Mordred lowered his head and gently lifted his left hand. In the center of his palm, there was a little light that looked like fireflies circling around. He slowly let out a breath and picked up a bottle from the ground. This bottle seemed to be the weapon of some knight statue. Mordred put the little light into the bottle and slowly walked in front of Jillian. "Before we leave, help me keep this for me." Her mind was blank. She instinctively took the bottle. This guy, did he really only get rid of 15% of the poison in his body? In front of the gate of the castle, the subordinates who had been waiting for a long time were all frowning. "It's here," Head Knight Lino suddenly said. At the same time, he slowly raised his hands. As he raised his hands, some light began to flash on his hands. It turned out that he was not just holding a sword. Instead, he was really holding a transparent sword. Only when this sword moved and refracted light could they see it. "It's here, what's here?" Everyone was stunned. Boom! Suddenly, there was a loud noise. At this moment, the gate of the castle was directly broken by something. It split into two neat pieces and then directly shot out. Everyone was shocked and almost panicked when they saw this huge and thick gate coming at them. Lino was the only one who didn't retreat at this moment. Instead, he stepped forward and waved the almost transparent sword in his hand. In an instant, he directly cut the two thick pieces of the gate into dozens of small pieces. In the dust, two figures slowly walked out from the shadow of the gate. There was also the sound of the shackles on their feet clanking as they walked. She came out. Spirit Witch. Who is that next to her? Everyone was shocked. The clothes he wore were thin, and many parts of his clothes were worn out due to the passage of time. The man was carrying a big golden sword on his shoulder. Lino took a deep breath and slowly straightened his body. His voice was heavy as he said, "Hundreds of heroic spirits of our ancestors and 100 gold-ranked magicians of the Magician Association worked together to set up the anti-magic force field. Is it still unable to stop you?" Legendary knight, Mordred? It seems that letting this spirit which visit the prison was a mistake from the beginning. Mordred tilted his head and looked at Lino. He casually said, "Don't think that this anti-magic force field is useless. After all, it is the product of hundreds of gold-ranked magicians working together. But everything has a time limit, so naturally, there will be a time when it will weaken. In about 30 years, if it is not replenished, this force field will actually disappear by itself." Lino took a deep breath. At this moment, he gave an order that shocked all of his subordinates. He ordered everyone to flee immediately and report the information they had received. "Mr. Lino, this is an order. Leave immediately. You must inform the Knight organization. If anyone doesn't leave, I will immediately strip him of his status as a knight." Everyone gritted their teeth and finally chose to obey this order. However, from the beginning to the end, Mordred did not have any intention of stopping them. Mr. Lino stood in front of Mordred and the spirit which alone. That almost transparent sword was now flowing with green light. It was no longer invisible. "Wind King. This is an imitation, right?" Mordred looked at it curiously. "You are this generation's prison guard? You can leave. All these years, you have worked hard guarding this prison for me." Great Knight Lino took a deep breath and said seriously, "To be able to battle with a hero from 100 years ago. I don't want to give up this opportunity." "Hero?" Mordred laughed. "It has been a long time since someone called me that." Lino said, "No matter how many sins you have committed in the past. But 100 years ago you were indeed a hero who participated in that great war. The number of evil souls that died in your hands was uncountable. Although I was not born when that great war happened, I believe that without you, it would have been impossible to win that war. So, at the very least, you are a hero who once saved the world." "Is that so?" Mordred suddenly lowered his head. His voice was so low that only he could hear it. "After so many years, do you still think that you have won? You really are hopelessly stupid." He suddenly waved the golden sword in his hand. The light of the half-moon sword surged out. Its speed was so fast that Great Knight Lino could only block it. He could not even dodge it. The blade that was flowing with green light was instantly shattered. The half-moon sword slashed his body and blasted him dozens of meters away. Just one hit, Great Knight Lino spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. Chapter 1288. Miraculously, after walking out of the castle gate, Jillian felt that her strength had recovered. It was because her strength had recovered that she once again felt the terror of Mordred. It was as if there were countless wraiths and evil spirits roaring around him at all times. These wraiths and evil spirits even continuously wanted to devour his body. For a moment, Jillian thought of pain, the pain of being crazily bitten. But this seemed to be just a fantasy. When the cold wind blew, what she saw was this ordinary and thin appearance. She looked at Great Knight Lino from afar. This was also a powerful knight, but if it was left to her to deal with him, she could only use a roundabout strategy. "Just now, you should have stopped the other knights as well." Jillian frowned. "At this time, I'm afraid that the fact that you left the prison has already been reported to the Knight mechanism. Forget it, let's leave this place first. Let's wait for a while more, there are still a few little guys here." As Mordred spoke, she raised her head and looked at the night sky. Miss Witch was startled. She saw that in the night sky, a transport plane had actually stopped at some point. At this time, 3 figures were jumping down from the transport plane. They landed and stood in a triangle. Jillian looked over and her face immediately turned ugly. The 3 people who came down from the transport plane were the 2 knights of the Round Table that she had met a few hours ago. Gareth and Clown. As for the third person besides Gareth and Clown, there was a woman in a tuxedo standing in the third corner. A smile that wasn't too ugly appeared on Miss Jillian's face, and she flipped her hair. "It seems that my dear Hopkins still doesn't trust me. He actually sent a few people to follow me all the way here." Then, this beautiful lady standing here, since she can move together with Gareth and Mr. Clown, I think she should be the only woman who inherited the name of Lancelot, right? I think that he should have rejected you from the start," Gareth said expressionlessly, his eyes locked on Mordred. In fact, Mr. Clown and Lancelot were the same. They didn't care too much about the Soul Witch. Miss Witch obviously didn't care about their contempt. She just smiled and said, "The people of the myth of Doomsday are still lurking in your country. Instead of going to hunt them down, you escorted me all the way here. Are you not afraid of wasting time?" "That's hard to say. Maybe the threat here is even greater." The clown smiled. Actually, they were all closing in. Gareth, Clown, and Lancelot were all closing in on her step by step. They had completely blocked off any possible escape routes that Miss Witch could think of. Even though the knight beside her used to be the fiercest and most evil knight, she still felt a little uncertain when facing 3 of the knights of the Round Table at the same time. After all, only 15% of the poison in Mordred's body had been cleared. Even though he had broken the statues of the Grand Knights and former Knights of the Round Table with a single blow, they were only the souls that retained a small part of their power when they were alive. On the other hand, Gareth and the other 2 had completely inherited the power of the Knights of the Round Table, and were at the peak of their power. "Are you the 12 knights of this generation?" Mordred looked at them, from Gareth to Clown, then to Lancelot. His gaze finally stopped on Lancelot, and he frowned slightly. Yes. Gareth was reliable in serious situations. At least, he was much more reliable than Clown. "Farrell, please go back to the castle. There are still 793 years left in your sentence." "Farrell." Mordred took a light breath. "It has been a long time since someone called me that. After all, you have been stripped of your title." Mr. Clown's smiling face turned into a crying face. He said in a joking tone, "Even though the knight mechanism has been unable to strip you of your inherited power, it is still suspended until now." "Mordred." Farrell was silent for a while before he slowly said, "I promised this Soul Witch to do something for her. After it is done, I will come back. What do you think? I don't want to draw my sword against the 12 Round Table here." "In that case," Mr. Clown's crying face turned into a smiling face, "I suddenly thought of a better idea. If this woman dies, then you don't have to go out, right?" Gee! A cold light suddenly shot directly toward the Soul Witch. It was the throwing knife in Dagonet's hand. However, the Soul Witch, who had been secretly on guard, didn't panic. Just as she was about to block, the blade of the golden greatsword stood in front of her and blocked the throwing knife. The clown's throwing knife wasn't a real attack. The moment the throwing knife was shot, his figure moved, and the moment the golden greatsword blocked the throwing knife, he was already in front of Farrell, and very simply threw a punch at Farrell's face. Although Mr. Clown wasn't tall and didn't look strong, among the 12 knights, he was known as the one with the strongest body and the highest pure strength. However, this direct hit was unable to do anything to Farrell. It didn't even manage to shift his face. In an instant, Farrell's head slightly tilted back, and then quickly bumped forward. His forehead directly hit the clown's head. Bang! The clown was instantly sent flying backward. He actually overpowered Dagonet in strength. Gareth was shocked, but his reaction was extremely fast. The moment Mr. Clown was sent flying backward, he didn't hesitate to stab with the sword in his hand. The tip of the sword was like a bolt of lightning, rapidly thrusting out 18 consecutive strikes. However, Farrell closed his eyes and easily dodged them. The sword wind that came out from the tip of the sword pierced 18 holes in the wall of the castle behind him at the same time. Not fast enough. The sound rang in Gareth's ears, and a sharp pain spread from his chest in that instant. That was the hilt of the golden sword, which had directly struck Gareth's chest. Like a clown, he was sent flying backwards. In just a few seconds, the moment the clown got up from the ground, Gareth bumped into him head-on. The clown received Gareth's attack. They looked at each other, and then suddenly took out a necklace from their necks. The necklace was the source of the 12 Round Table's power. However, the moment their power of inheritance appeared, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of them. The power of inheritance flowed around their bodies, and with the light on their bodies, it was the holy armor that could trigger the 12 Knights' power to descend. Too slow. Too slow. The golden greatsword in Farrell's hand directly struck Gareth and the clown. The holy armor that hadn't completely appeared on their bodies was instantly shattered. Gareth spat out a mouthful of blood. He hadn't even put on the inheritance holy armor, and he was actually knocked to the ground again? What kind of inheritors are there this time? The greatsword in Farrell's hand struck again, and this time, the clown was sent flying into the air. You actually need a second to activate the holy armor. You still dare to call yourselves the Round Table? At the same time, there was a shroud of darkness behind Farrell. Behind him, a black armored knight had appeared out of nowhere. The black armor covered his entire body, and traces of purplish-black light flickered on the black armor. You're not bad, but you're only average. Farrell turned around, and this time, the greatsword didn't strike, but slashed. The black armored knight was shocked, and raised the sword in his hand to block, but the force of the slash caused half of his body to sink into the ground. A large number of cracks even appeared on the sword in the black armored knight's hand. At the same time, a ripple of impact spread out in an instant, and the trees around the castle were directly knocked down. The ripple only gradually dissipated 100 meters away. This was only an imitation of the inheritance golden sword, and not the real inheritance golden sword. In less than 10 seconds, the 3 Round Table were easily defeated by the opponent. Gareth coughed out a mouthful of blood. He had never thought that humans could be so powerful. But he hadn't used the inheritance power yet. Bang! The clown fell from the sky and fell to the ground, but he didn't move at all. He had lost consciousness. Just like this, when the darkness comes again, when they appear again. Farrell muttered to himself, "You won't be able to resist even one of them." The darkness, them? Gareth staggered and stood up with difficulty. Farrell shook his head, and the golden sword in his hand spun in a circle, and slashed horizontally. The sword light rushed out 100 meters, and from him, he actually split the island apart. Seeing the seawater pouring in, Gareth felt like he was suffocating. At least to this extent. In the end, the golden sword was casually stabbed into the ground by Farrell, and he left with the witch. The 3 Round Table members, or to be exact, the 2 Round Table members who were still conscious, didn't have the strength to stop them. Gareth staggered back a step and then fell to the ground. It wasn't because he was afraid, but because his shiong bone was already broken. It's so powerful that it's like a joke. Gareth laughed bitterly. The black armor of the black armored knight, who was half buried in the soil, disappeared. Her delicate facial features were revealed, but she was also pale and bloodless. She raised her head to look at the night sky, and saw an armed helicopter slowly rising, and then flying away. She was silent for a long time, and then slowly said, "Gareth, do you have the strength to pull me out? Please give me at least an hour, or you can wake this clown up, Lancelot." He was so powerful that it was beyond the scope of humans, and according to what he said, he only removed 15% of the poison. In other words, he only had 10% to 20% of his strength now. Yes, absolutely yes. With this person's help, they would definitely be able to obtain that document, Acacia Records. In this world, there was absolutely no one more powerful than him. The face of the witch who was piloting the helicopter was flushed. Her body was in a state of extreme excitement, and she kept looking at Mordred, who was sitting in the back. Or rather, Farrell. She didn't know if it was an illusion, but this man's face didn't seem as thin as before. It seemed like he had gained some flesh. The door of the helicopter was open. Farrell was looking outside, and the seawater below was surging violently. Little bits of fluorescent light fell from the bottle in his hand, and fell on the sea. The little bits of fluorescent light gradually dissipated with the waves, and finally extinguished. These were the souls of those Grand Knights, the souls of the 12 Grand Knights. Although they were only a part of them, and after losing their carrier, they couldn't be preserved for too long, but wasn't it too wasteful to just scatter them like this? Even so, the witch only opened her mouth, and didn't choose to point out the other party's faults. The only one who knew Farrell was only her mother, and she only knew about Farrell's legend through various channels. "Who is your father?" Farrell suddenly asked. Jillian shrugged her shoulders and said, "I have never met him. My mother told me that my father died long ago. Perhaps you can tell me a bit, after all, you seem to know my mother?" Farrell frowned, and after a moment of silence, he suddenly asked, "How do you know of the existence of Acacia records?" Miss Witch narrowed her eyes and said, "This starts with a musician who was obviously very talented but liked to explore. However, what he obtained was not the Acacia records, but only a few pages of the Dead Sea Scrolls. I took these few pages of the Dead Sea Scroll from his hands and made a copy. Although the copy doesn't have the power of the scroll, it has the same function as a clue to the Acacia records. Only a few pages of the Dead Sea Scroll can't be gathered together." Farrell said indifferently, "No one has ever gathered the complete Dead Sea Scroll. You should give up and change to another request." "What?" Even the fiercest and most evil knight in history, Mordred, flinched at the sight of the Dead Sea Scroll. Jillian smiled sweetly. "If that's the case, your heroic appearance of defeating 3 members of the 12 Round Table will be greatly reduced in other people's impression." "You really want to find the Acacia records?" Farrell suddenly asked. "Otherwise, the reason why I went through so much trouble to save you is obviously not because I worship you like a little girl. After finding the Acacia records, what do you plan to do?" Farrell asked again. The witch looked at the night sky in front of her, and let out a silvery laugh. But it was just a laugh, and she didn't answer. "My name is Farrell." He also looked outside. "Mordred is already dead." "It doesn't matter," the witch said softly, "as long as you can help me, even if you want me to call you my lord, it doesn't matter." Farrell shook his head. "Go to Camlin." "Camlin?" The witch stared blankly. "Isn't that? Why go there?" "Since I want to find the Acacia records, I naturally need to retrieve some things." Farrell said indifferently, "This scroll has been searching for more than just a little witch like you." "You mean an inhuman?" The witch frowned. "Very strong? Stronger than you?" "You don't want to know what true strength is." He slowly closed his eyes, no longer paying attention to the witch. Yen PS1. Looking through the reward records, I found a cute user, the cutest fatso in the world, who served tea to the capitalist boss as usual. PS2. Then 27 became 29 OZT PS. July 29th. Chapter 1289. On the screen was Gareth's slightly pale face. Sir Hopkins of the Knights of the Fog organization silently listened to his report. "I'm very sorry, Sir Hopkins, we didn't succeed in stopping him from leaving." Sir Hopkins was silent for a moment before he frowned and asked, "Did he really say that he would go back to the castle prison?" Gareth nodded. "He did say that." "I see." Sir Hopkins nodded. "Only the participants on Prison Island know about Farrell's transgression. Issue a gag order to the knights on Prison Island." "But sir, this is Farrell. He has already left Prison Island?" Gareth's face was full of disbelief. Sir Hopkins shook his head and said rather helplessly, "Since he said that he would come back, then he will definitely come back. He never breaks his promise." "But, no need to say more." Sir Hopkins waved his hand. "The castle prison can't hold him." The 3 Round Table Knights were like children in front of him, unable to fight back. "Gareth, don't you understand?" "Sir." Sir Hopkins sighed. "The castle prison. It wasn't us who had the ability to lock Farrell in, but he walked involuntarily." "What?" Ignoring Gareth's current shock, Sir Hopkins said seriously, "Knight Gareth, I'll now give you a new mission. You have 6 hours to rest and hurry on your way. Please go with Dagonet to the operation point where you are responsible for eliminating the myth of Doomsday within the specified time. In addition, tell Lancelot to return to Her Majesty's side as soon as possible and continue her duties." Gareth could only stand at attention and nod in agreement. After the communication with Gareth ended, Sir Hopkins walked into the depths of the manor alone. After passing through layers of tight mechanisms, he finally came to a secret room that only he, the highest person in charge of the Knights of the Fog organization, could enter. Inside the secret chamber was an enormous throne. On top of the throne was a set of silver armor in a sitting posture. It was as if the person was a king. Sir Hopkins slowly walked to the front of the armor on the throne and reached out his hand. His fingers had just touched the armor when Sir Hopkins had to withdraw his hand as if he had been electrocuted. Knight slowly exhaled and muttered to himself, "Mordred, after so many years, you still won't accept anyone other than Farrell?" Farrell, who hadn't even put on his holy armor, had easily defeated Gareth and the other two. A melancholy expression appeared on Sir Hopkins' face. He silently raised his head and looked up from the throne. Behind the throne, there was a huge mural on the wallpaper. On the mural, there was a knight wearing silver holy armor and holding the legendary king's sword, fighting with hundreds of demons. A night passed quietly as the earth rotated on its axis. When he woke up in the morning, Miss Maid had already prepared the toiletries. Even the toothpaste had been squeezed onto the toothbrush. She also prepared a hot towel and stood aside waiting. "I suddenly feel guilty for being an evil feudal lord," Luaccio joked after wiping his face. Miss Maid smiled softly, carefully tidied up her master's clothes and said, "That Miss Orc left with her brother at 5:30 in the morning." "So early?" Luaccio blinked. Luaccio really slept. This was something he had never given up. If it wasn't necessary, he wouldn't even wake up before his biological clock. "Because there's still some distance from here to the tunnel entrance." She seemed to be afraid of missing the bus. Miss Maid straightened the clothes on Boss Luo's chest and flattened them before showing a satisfied look. "Also, Miss Rin called you half an hour ago." Luaccio nodded and said casually, "Probably because of the terrorist attack." "What did you say?" Miss Maid smiled and said, "I told Miss Wren that you hadn't gotten up yet, and nothing happened in Fog City last night. But she's still quite worried. She's probably asleep by now." After all, they were still 8 time zones apart. "I'll send her a text message later." Luaccio nodded and began to eat the breakfast sent by the hotel, while planning to leave Fog City. But according to the train information, several main lines in Fog City were temporarily suspended today. Among them, the route prepared by Luaccio was included. "It seems to be because of the terrorist attack." Miss Maid spread butter on the bread. "However, if we suddenly stop these few days, it may be because the next target of the attack will be on these few routes." Luaccio asked curiously, "How do you know there will be a next attack?" Yu Yi said casually, "Isn't it normal to attack and then make a request? Besides, so far, no so-called terrorist organization is responsible for the attack last night. Doesn't it prove that at least the culprit behind the attack hasn't reached an agreement with the government? Maybe they have made a request, but the government doesn't intend to announce it? That's also because they haven't reached an agreement," Miss Maid said matter-of-factly. "Otherwise, why would they suddenly stop these routes? Isn't it because they need to make some arrangements? Perhaps they already know the next action plan of the culprit behind the scenes, and are currently preparing to give the culprit a head-on blow. Finally, I'm afraid it's not an ordinary terrorist organization." Last night in the Eye of Fog City. Luaccio blinked. Last night, going to the Ferris wheel was purely an impromptu thing, but it seemed to have inadvertently disrupted the deployment of the organization behind the attack. Probably the current suspension of the route may be related to the murderer who was shot down by Miss Maid last night. Maybe the night mechanism has gotten some information. Well, Luaccio thought for a while, Then I'll postpone the trip. I think Peter-chan would be more willing to let me stay for 2 more days. After all, terrorist attacks happened in 4 cities at the same time last night. The whole country had become very nervous since last night. The Song Dynasty Hotel had tightened its surveillance since last night. Do you want to stay in the hotel for the whole day? Yu Yi asked softly. Luochio smiled. Just put 2 images here. Anyway, I'll stay for a few more days. Let's do something else today. For example? How about watching an opera? Luochio looked at the leaflet on the tourist brochure in the room. Miss Maid took out the leaflet and looked at the poster on it, Turandot. St. Pancras Railway Station. In the waiting hall, a small figure shuttled through the crowd. It was extremely agile, and often in an instant when people weren't paying attention, it would quickly take something from the front of a shop. It only took a little bit each time, a very little bit. After a while, it stopped its action and turned into the emergency passage. After a few turns, it came to a computer room and climbed into the computer room through the vent. In the computer room, Ajia heard the sound and quickly stood up. Our beastman Miss Lael jumped down from the air vent and shook her clothes in front of Olga. Instantly, bits and pieces fell from her body. Bread, candies, chocolates. Finally, Miss Lael took out a bottle of water from her collar. Come, eat. You didn't eat anything in the morning, you must be hungry. Sister, eat too. They directly sat on the ground and began to eat these spoils of war. Ajia picked up the hot dog bread and asked while eating, Sister, when will we get on the train? Soon, the train will depart at 2 p.m. Lael wiped the sauce on Ajia's lips with her sleeve. I've observed that we can climb to the track from the vent here. When it's about time, we'll get on the train from the track. After getting on the train, we'll sneak into the cargo compartment. If everything goes well, we'll reach Paris in 2 or 3 hours. Ajia ate and suddenly asked, Sister, aren't we going to find father? Facing her brother's question, Lael didn't say anything. There was one thing that she didn't tell the magician who helped her, and that was how she and Ajia were caught by the orc traffickers. She shook her head and hugged Ajia into her arms, saying softly, It's too dangerous here, let's go back. That person, if he really cared about me and you, he wouldn't need us to find him. He would have come back by himself. Ajia lowered his head, not knowing what to think. Seeing this, Lael cheered up and said with a smile, Ajia, look what I brought you. At this moment, she took out a small and delicate thing from her back pocket and waved it in front of Ajia. Harmonica. Putting this delicate harmonica into Ajia's hand, Lael said softly, Didn't you lose your harmonica on the ship? I think this is not bad, do you like it? Yes. Ajia liked it so much that he didn't want to let it go. After wiping it with his clothes, he put it to his lips and started to play. This was the song he learned from Will last night, but he only learned half of it. Original scenery of hometown. Elizabeth Tower. Old name Big Ben. On the fence on the sightseeing floor of the clock tower, a clear sound came from the man's harmonica. The continuous notes formed a song. Imagine. His lips were very thin, and his hair was flaxen color. He wasn't very strong, but his body was very slender. He was wearing dark blue Baroque-style clothes. He looked like an actor in a stage play. But this era obviously wasn't the era of his clothes. Imagine. Another man slowly walked over. He was the bartender of the tavern where Rant, a senior member of Mythology of the Apocalypse, was killed. He came to the side of the man playing the harmonica and said, John Lennon, I thought you don't like modern music. He continued to play until the song was finished. Then he put down the harmonica and looked at the bartender. Dobas, is there still no news about Reed? The bartender. Dobas shook his head. According to the original plan, Reed was responsible for the Eye of Fog City, but he obviously failed. It is very likely that he has fallen into the hands of the Knights of Fog City. Maybe they already know something from Reed's mouth. The man shook his head and said, I believe in Reed. He has Ji Lian's spirit protection. No one can go beyond the power of the spirit which to ask a person, let alone a person with a strong will. In fact, I have some reservations about this spirit which, Dobas said indifferently, since the beginning of the plan, I have been unable to contact her. Sir, we don't even know the real plan of this spirit which, he said, whether she sincerely helps us or has other plans, it has no impact on the plan itself. However, since Reed is missing, let's move the plan forward. 3 days later? Dobas frowned. The British government may not accept it. What we need is not their compromise, but fear. He looked in the direction of the Platinum Palace where the Queen was. We have been hiding like rats for too long. Only fear can give us a real land to live on. The bill to leave the European Union has been passed. This country will be isolated and helpless in the future. This will be our best chance. A country where the orcs can live freely under the sun. Dobas, do you see it? Caesar, 3:00 in the afternoon, plan ahead. He turned around, waved his hand, and said in a deep voice, let the myth of the end of the world start from here. Her Majesty's Theatre. It was impossible to enter the theatre before the ticket was bought. It was impossible for the servant girl. She couldn't let her master enter the theatre with the original sin. It's not that serious. Luaccio gently squeezed the servant girl's hand, and then held her hand. They followed the crowd and slowly walked into the theatre. There was still more than half an hour before the official performance, but even though they had gotten the ticket, the whole process of entering the theatre was not too smooth. Boss Luo, who had long been used to his own body, looked at the layers of security at this time without any ripples in his heart. The inspection was so strict, not because of the aftermath of the terrorist attack last night, but because a big shot also came to the theatre today. Her Majesty the Queen of the British Empire. Others did not know that Her Majesty was not in the mood to watch the opera at this time. Her arrival was only the idea of her aides behind the scenes. At such a time, Her Majesty, as the representative of the country, could not show panic. She had to act as if nothing had happened so that the people would not take the attack too seriously. It was commonly known as the whitewash of peace. I should have made up for this year's salary and asked these guys to go back to their hometown. When entering the theatre, holding the beloved Queen, he did not forget to whisper in the ears of his personal bodyguard, Lancelot. Genius remembered the address of this site in 1 second. Mobile version of reading website. Chapter 1290. No matter how dissatisfied the Queen was with the idea of the staff this time, since she was here, the security work naturally needed to be done. Even because of this delicate time, the security was even stricter than usual. After the Queen entered the special seat, Lancelot began to patrol around. Of course, there were 6 experienced knights guarding the Queen, and there were also many security personnel assigned to the Queen by the Empire. These knights were temporarily transferred. In the past, the Queen would only have Lancelot by her side. In fact, this arrangement was entirely because Lancelot had not recovered. It was only 10 hours since the battle last night. Although she was treated by the medical technology of the Knights of Mist, she was not in a good state at this time. The holy armor was a kind of mysterious power, and the manufacturing technology originated from the Celtic gods. Even if it was damaged, it could automatically repair itself. It would take at least 6 more hours. Feeling the self-repair state of Lainlate Dulake, the only female member of the Round Table 12 didn't smile at all. She had already patrolled around and returned to the Queen's seat again. I haven't found any suspicious people for the time being. Facing the old Queen, Lancelot's eyes were calm, her legs were slightly apart, and she said with her hands behind her back, "Relax, little Lancelot." The Queen waved her hand. "In fact, I'm not that important. Really, Lancelot, I'm just an old woman standing in front of people, the so-called dignity of this country." The Queen lowered her head and teased her beloved pet, smiled, and said, "Some people really think I'm important. Do you know, I heard an interesting joke last year. A group of terrorists felt that as long as they held my pet hostage, they could make me compromise their demands, so they even planned how to kidnap it. Lancelot's face was expressionless. The Queen scratched her beloved pet's chin with her fingers. You see, they all think you may be more important than a country. My country's dignity is really a joke. Hasn't the performance started yet? At this time, Her Majesty put her handheld glasses in front of her eyes and looked down at the direction of the stage. There's still half an hour before the official performance, Your Majesty, Lancelot replied with one last sentence. However, at that moment, the Queen suddenly stood up from her seat. She bent her waist slightly as though she was trying to close the distance between her and something. She was looking at something. Lancelot frowned. Your Majesty, what happened? At this moment the Queen said slowly, there are really people who look so similar in this world. It's unbelievable. Queen? Her Majesty the Queen slowly put down the glasses in her hand, and seemed to have fallen into deep thought. She muttered to herself, so many years have passed. She should have aged even more than me. Suddenly, Her Majesty the Queen turned around and said in a serious tone, Lancelot, can you help me with something? Yes, Your Majesty. The sound of the shutter rang softly. Before the performance started, many seats had similar sounds. Boss Luo's seat was no exception. Of course, it was not for the purpose of posting pictures on WeChat Moment. It was just a kind of report, to appease Nanny Wren on the other side of the hemisphere, who might be sleeping like a dead pig but would be worried when she woke up the next day. Of course, he and Miss Servant Girl entered the world together. Well, maybe she can eat when she wakes up. Luo Qiu smiled and put away his mobile phone. Then, he looked at the servant girl beside him and suddenly thought of something interesting. He asked softly, Is there anything you dislike about this country? Why do you say so? Yu Yi blinked. Luoqiu began to play with Miss Servant Girl's fingers. You know what I'm talking about. Yes. Miss Servant Girl shook her head and put her hand on her chest, saying softly, She just exists in several similar subworlds and experiences similar things, but I have more. This small part of dissatisfaction has disappeared a long time ago. Legend and uniqueness. It was as if it had appeared in multiple subworlds. In the instant that it appeared, everything that had been praised would be unified. Thousands of worlds could become the only independent one. It was the same for Miss Servant Girl. The former national hero, the New Orleans girl, was just a part of her past. And, Yu Yi smiled faintly, I've already helped her get her revenge. When Boss Luo was about to show a puzzled expression, someone walked slowly. She came to Luoqiu and Miss Servant Girl on the stairs. It was a lady in a tuxedo. Her lips seemed a little pale, and her facial features were exquisite. Miss, is it convenient for you to come upstairs? Someone wants to see you, she said in a low voice. Birmingham, Victoria Square. During the day, whether it was tourists or local residents, they all liked to wander around here. It was the most crowded time of the day. Two men, one in a suit and the other in a worker's uniform, met unexpectedly in the square, and then walked up the stairs side by side. The two of them only had eye contact, but right at this moment, a black shadow appeared behind the two of them. They keenly sensed something, but before they could react, their shoulders were directly placed on by someone. Between them, a bearded man stretched out his head, and said in a tone like meeting an old friend, Are you two interested in having a cup of coffee in Birmingham's Knight's mechanism? The two were suddenly shocked, and many thoughts flashed in their minds, but they finally pointed to one. They were exposed. And it was the leader who decided to take action in advance more than an hour ago. You are Tristan. Tristan. The 12 knights stationed in Birmingham. The man in the worker's uniform almost at this time recognized the bearded man's origin. But before the two of them could resist, the bearded man knocked their heads together without saying a word. After seeing stars, they fainted. Seeing that the two were about to fall to the ground, the bearded man supported them with one hand and said exaggeratedly, Are you two drunk in broad daylight? You two drunkards. Don't expect me to send you home. The result of such a performance was, no one cared. In this way, the bearded man carried the two people and the bags in their hands, and calmly left the square. He threw the two fainted people into a small truck. In this industrial city, such a small truck was too common. He also walked into the container, but it was not really a place to load goods, but a variety of instruments and screens were placed. Mr. Tristan, have you already subdued the two thugs from Myth of Doomsday? That's fast. The bearded man shrugged and said, It seems that the ones responsible for attacking here are just two small characters. At the same time, he opened the bags carried by the two men and looked at the things inside. It's actually a portable explosion tactic, a 1978 product of the Magician Association. If this thing explodes in the square, even a small character can cause a lot of trouble. In any case, you have successfully organized them. The subordinates in the container were obviously relieved. Although it seemed very simple, and even without bloodshed. If it was not for the information sent by the Knights of Fog, I'm afraid that they would only be aware of the disaster after the square. The danger was naturally only understood by the Knights of Fog. However, they think that they really took action in advance. The bearded man, Tresty said thoughtfully, it seems that they have already guessed that Reed was caught, and even gave out the information. I hope everything else goes well. With that, he waved his hand, and the subordinates understood and said in a deep voice, Retreat. City of Glasgow, in a building next to the Glasgow Central Railway Station. The position of the fourth floor. Like an explosion caused by a gas leak, all the glass windows on the entire floor were shattered in an instant. A large number of glass chips fell to the ground, and pedestrians screamed. In the destroyed fourth floor, there were 5 men with burns all over their bodies and eyes. Moreover, they had lost consciousness and were scattered all over the place. Here, only a young man in a police uniform was left standing. He still grabbed the back collar of the 6th man, carried him, and walked out. Mr. Geraint. Several knights of the Glasgow City Knights of Fog hurriedly ran down the stairs at this time. The man in the police uniform threw down the man in his hand and said frivolously, I'll leave the cleaning to you. I have to continue patrolling the streets. With that, Mr. Geraint jumped out of the window. An armored vehicle with the logo of the highway police was parked here. Mr. Geraint got on the car and put on his helmet. He really went to patrol. Horrified screams came out in the dark tunnel and kept echoing. Suddenly, a dark red light appeared. In the tunnel, several figures ran crazily. 3 men and 2 women. Behind them, there seemed to be something terrible chasing them, so that their faces were full of fear. Suddenly, one of their companions fell to the ground. On the back of his fallen comrade, there was a bright throwing knife stuck in his back. Da-da, da-da, da-da. The sound of heavy armor walking came little by little from the tunnel. They seemed to be stuck by something at this time and couldn't move. Finally, a figure wearing golden armor, whose entire body was emitting a chaotic and ruthless aura, entered their line of sight. And this fellow wearing golden armor had bright throwing knives clamped between his 10 fingers. The flying knives shot out and cold light flashed. Ah! After a few screams, these men and women fell to the ground one after another. Their throats had been pierced through by the flying knives. In the next second, a figure in azure armor arrived quickly, but he seemed to be one step too slow. Dagonet, I said to keep him alive. Light and shadow dispersed from his body. The azure armor split open, revealing Gareth inside. At the same time, the golden armor dispersed as well. Mr. Clown could be heard crying as he said, I'm sorry, I didn't notice. Dagonite? Just kidding, just kidding. Clown jumped behind the man who was stabbed in the back, turned him over, put on a smiling face and said, Here, you want him alive. It's really. Gareth rubbed his forehead, and at the same time, looked behind Dagonite in distress. This tunnel was full of potholes left by destruction. It would take more than a day to repair it. Gareth had to take out the phone helplessly. It's me, Gareth. This gangster is also subdued. Yes, I know. In addition, I suggest that the trains on this line stop temporarily. I don't think there's any way for the Eurostar to leave today. Gareth was on the phone, really? Tristan, has Geraint completed the task? Very well, then there's only one left. Dagonite? Dagonite. But Dagonite on the side put his hands behind his head, whistling. Hissle. Gone. Gareth could only see his back disappearing into the darkness. Lancelot led the way in the corridor. Behind her, Miss Maid and Boss Luo followed slowly. According to Lancelot's original intention, the Queen only invited this lady, and her male companion didn't need to follow. But when she invited, Lancelot unexpectedly changed her mind. She seemed to find it difficult to ignore the existence of the young man behind her. Lancelot. Is she one of the legendary knights of the Round Table? Lancelot frowned, stopped and turned around. It was Luocchio who asked. Boss Luo smiled slightly at this time. Sorry, I'm interested in this legend these 2 days, so I read more about the Knights of the Round Table. I really don't mean to offend you, but I'm really curious about this name. Generally, ladies rarely use such a name. Wait. Lancelot suddenly spoke. Luocchio blinked. She said indifferently, Wait, please wait outside the door. Luocchio opened his mouth. Miss Maid narrowed her eyes at this time, and was about to speak. Luocchio waved his hand slightly and whispered in her ear, I want to talk to her alone. You go in by yourself. Miss Maid glanced at Lancelot, then nodded thoughtfully. They didn't speak for the rest of the way. Lancelot seemed to have completely forgotten Luoccio's question about the name until they finally arrived at the destination. She opened the door and made an inviting gesture, letting Miss Maid walk into the Queen's special seat alone. She slowly closed the door, then stood outside the door like a sculpture. Boss Luo looked at Lancelot at this time and asked with a smile, Miss Lancelot, how old are you this year? She seemed to be a little astonished, looking at Luocchio, and couldn't help opening her mouth slightly. At the same time, in the room, when Miss Maid appeared in front of Her Majesty, the dignified queen of the country couldn't help but shake her old face. She stood up from her seat at once. Teacher? Little Elizabeth, long time no see.